Chapter 462. Relying on the faith of humans to give birth to another god. Rick naturally understood what woming meant. However, there was no god that could be born just like that. Even the other divine beings were born after who knows how many years. However, Woming shook his head. Rick, you're underestimating yourself. You're the leader of humans, a special human who could attract my attention. Although the human leader's words were a little absolute, since there was no telling if there were other humans in this world, Rick had indeed attracted Woming's attention through the black origin mud in the Star Cup. It was because of his strong belief that Rick's voice could reach Woming's ears through the black origin mud. Haven't you realized that there's a god like that beside you? Rick's pupils instantly contracted when he heard Woming's words. The god of games. Rick remembered how he often played chess with that unknown existence when he was a child. Although Rick believed that the god of games existed, he didn't need to have such childish thoughts after becoming the leader of humans. Therefore, Rick never played chess again, nor did he tell anyone about the story of the god of games. It could be said that this was the first time Rick played chess with Shiobi and Woming in the old capital of the Forest Elves. The god of games, huh? Although it doesn't sound very reliable, I'll leave it to you, this world. Woming nodded, and then threw the Star Cup behind Rick's back. Rick didn't react in time. When he saw Woming casually throw the Star Cup, he didn't catch it. Gilliar didn't move either, and quietly watched Woming's actions. The ruined Star Cup looked as fragile as glass, and it was thrown by Woming just like that. Subsequently, the Star Cup did not fall to the ground as Rick had expected. The Star Cup floated firmly in the air as if it had been caught by someone. Then, a figure slowly appeared, turning from transparent to solid. This is... Rick stared at the scene in disbelief. She was wearing a green shirt, blue shorts, magenta shoes, and a jacket. There was a pink ribbon on the back of her jacket. She wore a checkered hat with a plum blossom logo printed on it. Under the hat, she had short white hair. Her cheeks were printed with hearts, and her left and right eyes had spades and diamonds respectively in her heterochromatic pupils. As expected of the god of games, his face, eyes, and even his hat were all pictures of poker cards. The god of games, a deity formed from your faith and your will. Woming explained. I'm Tedu. The god of games held the celestial cup in his hand as he hovered in the air, greeting Rick, who was staring blankly at Tedu. The god of games, does it really exist? Rick was a little excited. Then, Woming mercilessly slapped Tedu's face. At the same time, he is also the weakest god. Outside the cave, Woming, Rick, Gilliar, and Tedu arrived. Ignoring the fact that Woming said he was the weakest god, Rick was still a little excited. This was a god who existed by his own will. Although he was born by your will, Tedu is the weakest god because it is only your faith. Woming explained as if he saw through Rick's thoughts. Although you're not wrong. Can't you give me a little face? Tedu chuckled. Although Woming said he was the weakest, Tedu didn't care, like an optimist. Although what Woming said was the truth. Well then, I'll take my leave first, everyone. With that, Tedu flew into the sky. Tedu, who had ascended to the throne of the only god, was now preparing to repair this world. It couldn't be said that Tedu was trustworthy, but as a god born from Rick's faith alone, his way of thinking was still simpler than the other gods. At the very least, Tedu, who was born from Rick's faith, was trustworthy. Perhaps it was because his lifelong wish had been fulfilled, or for some other reason, but Rick was now staring blankly at Tedu, who was flying into the sky, as if he was possessed, without saying a word. At that moment, Gilliar spoke while Rick was still in a daze after Tedu left. My lord, are you really going to give a celestial cup to the weakest just like that? Gilliar was a skywing after all, and her mindset of respecting the strong wasn't that easy to change. Woming, the strongest, had given the greatest spoils of war to the weakest, which made Gilliar very unhappy. But she had no choice. Since it was her master's will, she could only endure it. After all, I can't use it either, can I? I only have one goal, and that is to help the humans of this world. Although the god of games is the weakest god, Tedu's feelings for humans aren't weak. Woming smiled as he explained to Gilliar while looking at the sky. Perhaps the mindset of respecting the strong has been deeply ingrained in your mind, but I still want to say that humans aren't weak. However, Gillyre still looked as if she didn't agree with that. Through the thoughts of humans, other gods were born. Are humans weak? Not at all. Gillyre then refuted Wuming's words. But even so, my lord, humans are on the brink of extinction in this war. This is a fact that you can't refute. Gillyre first bowed to Wuming to atone for her rebuttal, before continuing. Even so, in the end, the celestial cup was still obtained by a god born from the faith of humans. It can be said that humans have won this war. Wuming smiled. After all, the condition for humans to win was the end of the war, while the condition for other gods to win was to obtain the celestial cup. I defeated Arthas. This is the result. I am the victor. Now, humans are the victors, and the victors are the strong. Gillyre then fell silent. Whatever you say, my lord. As if throwing a tantrum, Gillyre snorted and didn't say anything else. Wuming looked at Gillyre with a bitter smile, then said with a smile, "Well, you still have a long way to go in terms of understanding humans. I'm not asking you to have any desire to protect humans. I just want you to acknowledge other races. The mindset of respecting the strong isn't suitable for you, who are my guardians." Yes, yes, my lord. After ending the conversation between master and servant, Wuming began to admire the reconstruction of this world. Not created by anyone, not expected by anyone, not prayed by anyone. Tetu's voice began to sound in the sky. The nameless race that evolved from beasts to bipedal walking with their own consciousness and obtained intelligence, humans. Tetu's voice wasn't loud, but it was as if the entire world could hear him. For such a race, I, as the only god, grant you a name. Humanity, race of humans. The moment the humans were given their names, the sky of this planet lit up. The dark clouds all disappeared, and the sun was exposed. Plants instantly covered the earth, butterflies fluttered among the flowers, and birds soared freely in the sky. The entire world seemed to be alive again. Not only that, but most of the terrain was also changed, and there were more chess pieces on the ground. Next, the exceed 16 races who claim to have intelligence. You will swear to the covenant as your worship, abide by the rules of the 10 covenants, and start a new game in this new world. Well then, let's continue the game. Listening to Tetu's speech and looking at the land that was restored to life, Wuming smiled helplessly. Well done, but all I can say is that as expected of the god of games. So, my lord, do you want the celestial cup back? Gillyre egged him on. Well, looking at the tears of joy flowing out of Rick's eyes as he looked down at the land that was restored to life, Wuming turned to leave. Since I'm not interested, I'll leave the rest to the players. Chapter 463. Wuming slowly walked on the land that was overflowing with life, admiring the scenery around him. The trees were lush, butterflies were dancing, and all kinds of small animals were coming and going. Birds were flying freely in the sky. Arriving at a highland, Wuming looked down at the plains in front of him and sighed. You don't say controlling the Star Cup is really like controlling the ownership of a planet. In just an instant, the entire planet changed. It was as if Tetu had entered an editing interface. He formatted the dying planet and gave it new life. At that moment, Shobi, who was following beside Wuming, spoke. Shobi, I like the current planet. Shobi looked at the land in front of her with a happy expression. Wuming couldn't help but look at his sister, who was smiling so innocently. After Tetu reorganized the world, he set the 10 covenants. Wuming didn't pay attention to the content of the covenants, only knowing that they were related to the game. Wuming couldn't help but complain about Tetu again, as expected of the god of games. In short, the entire world had become a world where everything was decided through the game. This way, humans wouldn't be deliberately harmed. After that, Rick brought the spirits back to the village. Seeing her brother return safely, Crone was so happy that she hugged her brother and cried for a while. Wuming, on the other hand, quietly canceled his clone and came to the village. After all, in everyone's eyes, the siblings Villo and Shobi had been staying in the village all this time. By the way, during the time he stayed in the village, Crone came to Wuming many times. Of course, it wasn't what you imagined. Crone came to Wuming to find out what her brother was doing. Of course, Wuming deliberately avoided this question every time. After some time, Crone gave up on getting information from Wuming and turned to Shobi. After spending so much time together, Crone understood the relationship between Wuming and Shobi. A kind and capable brother and a shy and innocent sister who always hid behind her brother. In Crone's impression, Shobi and Wuming had never been separated and were always together. Therefore, Crone thought that Shobi must know something about him. After all, she was a child and it was easy to get information from her. That was Crone's idea, but reality slapped her in the face. Shobi, who had been instructed by Wuming, was naturally feigning ignorance and not telling Crone. Although Crone wasn't happy that she couldn't get anything out of Shobi after half a day, thanks to this, her relationship with Shobi, they were like sisters. Thanks to Crone, Wuming, but Shobi's Shobi. Even if Crone was willing to accept Shobi after knowing her identity, it didn't mean that others were willing to accept her. Therefore, after a few days of recuperation in the village, Wuming decided to leave with Shobi. He would let the image of a kind and reliable brother and a pure and timid sister be fixed in the hearts of Crone and the others. Wuming used the excuse of, Shobi and I are going back to our hometown, and the current world is decided by the game, so there's no need to worry about safety to leave with Shobi. Wuming still remembered the scene of everyone sending them off. Crone hugged Shobi and cried, while Rick and Wuming shook hands. Rick knew that once Wuming left, it was very likely that he would never see him again in this lifetime. Take care, Villo. You too, Rick. There weren't many words, nor were there any words of gratitude. With just a few words, the two of them let go of their clenched hands. Then, under everyone's reluctant and blessings, Wuming took Shobi and rode the horse of this world that Crone and the others had given them and headed into the distance. After traveling for a while, Wuming released the horse and let it return to nature. Then, Wuming and Shobi walked on the ground. After all, the two of them really didn't need any means of transportation. How does it feel to gain feelings, Shobi? Wuming gently touched Shobi's head and asked. Shobi put her hand on the power furnace in front of her chest and slowly answered Wuming. Shobi can't say, but Shobi is very happy, brother. Is that so? That's enough, my sister. Looking up, Wuming felt the wind blowing against his face and said in a relaxed tone, I'm preparing to leave this world. What about you? Wuming asked. Shobi understood what Wuming meant. She was abandoned by the Kakai seed, and the possibility of her returning was not high. Therefore, Wuming wanted to ask if she wanted to go with him. Then, Shobi shook her head. Shobi is preparing to return to the Kakai seed and pass on her feelings to everyone. Shobi stared at the pair of mechanical eyes. Although it was mechanical, it was full of charm and emotions like a living creature. This is going to be a tough road. Are you ready? Wuming once again patted Shobi's head and exhorted his sister like an elder brother. Yes, Shobi is ready. Shobi will definitely let all the Kakai seed gain feelings, brother. Shobi looked at Wuming with a smile. Through those eyes, Wuming read the firm belief. Wuming smiled and then activated the soul of words. A person with a supreme protective divine power. God protects him, the devil hates him, and no enemy can approach him. He is like a fountain of vitality that constantly surges, granting the world equal protection. Then, through his hand that had yet to move away from Shobi's head, Wuming transmitted his protection into Shobi's body. Feeling the increasingly powerful power in her body, Shobi was at a loss. Wuming continued to increase the power of the protection. About half an hour later, Wuming stopped the protection. With this protection, even if Arthas revives and uses a divine strike, it will be enough to withstand it. Wuming let go of his hand that was touching Shobi's head. Then, Wuming half-squatted down and looked into Shobi's eyes. With your brother's protection, you can rest assured and do what you want to do, Shobi. Feeling Wuming's power in her body, Shobi touched the core on her chest and said, "Brother, do you still have a thing that Shobi gave you?" Shobi asked, "That metal ball, right? How could I have lost it?" Wuming smiled. Then he activated the golden ripples beside him. Wuming reached in and took out a fist-sized metal ball. He handed it to Shobi. Shobi took the ball and placed it on her chest. Then the ball seemed to come to life and emitted light. Shobi's core was visibly split into two, and half of it was sucked into the ball. Then Shobi removed the ball and handed it to Wuming. "Shobi has your power, so the core no longer restricts Shobi. Shobi has divided the core into two, and half of it has been stored in here. Brother, carrying her is like carrying Shobi." But Wuming hesitated. Logically speaking, as long as the core of the Kikai seed was not destroyed, she was not dead. Shobi had given half of her heart to Wuming. This made Wuming feel flattered. This was simply putting her life in someone else's hands. Brother also said that the world is not dangerous now, and I believe in my brother. Shobi looked at Wuming, her eyes full of expectation. She believed that Wuming could protect Shobi's core. This was what Wuming read through Shobi's eyes. "Give me the heart. I will never let it go for the rest of my life. Shobi too, with your brother's power, Shobi will not let go of your brother." The wind blew, brushing the grass on the ground. The sun shone gently on the brother and sister on the ground. Everything was so beautiful. Chapter 464. Shobi revealed Kikai's equipment and flew into the sky to leave. Wuming did not move, remaining on the high ground overlooking the land. "My lord, are you leaving?" With a spatial ripple, Gopril's voice came from behind Wuming. Gopril was a skywing. After all, so Wuming had her avoid arousing suspicion and not appear in front of Crone and the others. And because the atmosphere between Wuming and Shobi was just right, Gopril tactfully did not appear. Once Shobi left, Gopril appeared from space. "What? Are you excited because you can't wait to go to my world?" Wuming half-joked. "Well, a little." Gopril smiled, the wings on her back trembling, showing how unsettled she was. Alas, Wuming cruelly shattered Gopril's fantasy. "For the time being, I probably won't summon you. Just obediently stay on a bot." How could it be like this? Gopril was like a deflated balloon, powerlessly slumping to the ground. This world has already become meaningless. "Master, please hurry and take me away." Gopril was like a canary in a cage, looking at Wuming with a pitiful gaze. That was because Tay2 had turned this world into a game where everything was decided. That meant that there would be no more killing. This was hell for the Skywings, who loved to kill and snatch kills, as well as the god-slaying weapons. As a cute girl, it's not good to always talk about killing and fighting. You need to learn how to cultivate your character. How about this? Tell Azrael to give an order to all the Skywings that the new generation of Skywings is no longer a killing machine, but a collector of culture. The current mission of the Skywings is to collect the culture and knowledge of this world. Whether it's to collect books or use magic to record them, gather as much knowledge as you can. The moment he said this, Gopril became interested. She had always liked all kinds of culture. By the way, after collecting the culture, the Skywings need to study it and learn the advantages of it. Don't be like bookworms who only know how to copy. "Yes, my lord. Your subordinate will do it right away," Gipril replied playfully, then fled into space and disappeared. Wuming smiled helplessly and shook his head. Then, Wuming said to no one, "Aren't you going to come out and meet me? After all, I'm your benefactor who helped you ascend to the throne of the one god." After Wuming finished speaking, a child's voice sounded. "Ha ha ha, are you leaving? Do you still need me to send you off?" Tay2 appeared in front of Wuming and laughed happily. It had to be said that after becoming the only god, Tay2 could be said to be an omnipotent god. However, he could only be omnipotent on this planet. In any case, the current Wuming had no confidence in defeating the current Tay2's day. If he were to leave this world, while he would not be completely useless, he would still be much weaker. At the very least, in another world, Wuming would be able to grind Tay2 to the ground. "There's nothing wrong with the Celestial Cup, right?" Wuming ignored Tay2's joke and asked about serious matters. "No, there's nothing left of that black origin soil you mentioned. If not for the fact that there are some traces left inside the celestial cup. I'm afraid I would have thought that you were lying to me. Te2 was like an optimist as he happily answered Wuming. Incidentally, Te2 was still lying down in the air, using his arm as a pillow. It's best if you be careful. If you get corrupted by that thing, we might become mortal enemies, Wuming warned. Ha, even if that happens, I'll only play games with you. I don't like fighting and killing. Te2 was not wrong. If Te2 was really corrupted by the black origin soil, with Te2's spirit, the black origin soil would not be able to turn Te2 evil. It might even make Te2 an even more powerful good god. However, even if Te2 was a good god, he would still treat Wuming as an enemy. That was why the black origin soil was so frightening. If the black origin soil was allowed to corrupt all worlds, then Wuming would really become an enemy of the entire world. Forget it. I'm really an idiot for worrying about you. Wuming smiled bitterly and shook his head. Well then, I'll be leaving first. Help me take care of the humans, god of games. With that, Wuming's figure disappeared from where he was. Don't worry, I'm very fair, Te2 said with a smile, but that pink face of his was black no matter how you looked at it. And so, Wuming ended his journey in this world and returned to the dimensional tunnel. Once inside, Wuming was not in a hurry to head to the world of singularities, and instead flew out of the tunnel. Now, the flaws of this body could be seen. His authority incarnation had too many limitations and was not powerful enough. Even the divine blade of salvation that was one with Wuming was only a replica in this body and was not as powerful as before. Therefore, Wuming decided to return this body to the furnace to reconstruct and evolve it. Wuming soon returned to the root, and nothing happened because Kalas was there. Lord Wuming. Kalas greeted from the head of Wuming's main body. You've worked hard, Kalas. Wuming said. You're too kind. Kalas replied, flattered. Wuming smiled and didn't say anything more. The relationship between the two of them was already beyond the point of needing thanks. Then, Wuming revealed the true form of this body, which was the body of the root dragon. Wuming looked at his main body, which was much smaller than before, and was a little troubled. So it's time to level up. Then, Wuming's consciousness disappeared from this body and returned to his main body. Wuming, who had returned to his main body, opened his eyes, and an indescribable aura filled the entire root. Then, the dragon horns on Wuming's head glowed, and the golden chains around him danced. If my main body encountered the Star Cup's consciousness, I might be able to kill it with one claw. Wuming felt his current strength and said confidently, Let's see which singularity Chaldea has reached. With that, Wuming's huge ruby-like dragon eyes turned golden, and something invisible flowed in his eyes. Not long after Wuming's eyes turned golden, Wuming's eyes turned red again. The ocean, huh? This should be the third singularity. So far, Chaldea had reached the third singularity, and it seemed that it was almost done. This was all because of Wuming's clairvoyance that evolved in his root. Wuming had just seen Chaldea conquer one singularity after another after leaving Winterwood City. The 100 Years' War, the City of Seven Hills, and Oceanus from Greek mythology. Although Wuming did not stay in Rick's world for long, it seemed that the flow of time between worlds was different. Chaldea had already completed 2 singularities, and the third seemed to be almost done. Well, I'll leave it to them for now. Through his clairvoyance, Wuming also saw the vampire that Wuming summoned for Olga Marie. She had contributed a lot on this journey. Not only that, but Gadatsi also met a lot of reliable servants. I'll level up my backup machine first. As he spoke, Wuming began to move his hands and feet on the huge dragon body lying beside him. Chapter 465. Inside the Root of Origin, Wuming had been upgrading his own body for some time. Because there were many things that needed to be upgraded, after Wuming came up with a general format, he put the body aside and then channeled the power of the Root of Origin into the body, allowing it to be modified by the Root of Origin's energy. That's it for now. Wuming nodded the huge dragon head in satisfaction. Chaldea should have finished conquering the 4th singularity, right? How about I go to the next singularity and wait for them? Wuming thought and activated clairvoyance again, spying on Chaldea and the others. Oh, the mastermind has come out early. How unbecoming of a big boss, Wuming said sarcastically. Then, Wuming looked around. I don't think the root of origin will attack so coincidentally. I'll go meet that Magic King. With that, Wuming flapped his wings and flew out of the root of origin. But then, traces of black matter appeared outside the root of origin. In the fourth singularity of the M-Moon world, under the magic fog city of the underworld, in an underground space similar to Winterwood City, for huge pillars of flesh with eyes released powerful magic power, wreaking havoc in this underground space. If Wuming was here, he would definitely recognize this thing. The demon god pillar that Lev once transformed into was such a disgusting thing. The residual magic power in the space proved that a few servants had just left. In front of the pillars of flesh, many people stood there. Wuming knew most of the people present, such as Gadatsi, Matthew, Pamilia, Mordred, and the others. They were all nervously watching a blue-haired servant with the body of a child talk to the mastermind controlling the pillars of flesh. Opposite them stood a white-haired man in ancient Israeli clothing. Just by standing there, his powerful magic power increased the pressure on everyone. The demon god pillars were arranged behind the man like stars surrounding the moon, and the identity of this white-haired man was already beyond doubt. The only one who could control the demon god pillars was that demon King Solomon. Having had enough of the boring conversation, Solomon shook his head helplessly. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I have to say that human weapons are just like humans. Both of them are hopeless. Upon hearing this, Matthew immediately raised his shield and stood in front of Gadatsi. Even though his legs were trembling, Matthew still firmly guarded Gadatsi. Instead, it was Pamilia who went against her usual arrogance. She had an unusually calm expression and didn't say anything, as if she was waiting for the right moment. Oh yeah, are they going to attack us? The blue-haired man said in a low voice, not at all afraid that he was about to leave. However, this did not mean that others would not be angry. Tisk, you really make people angry, Mordred said irritably. She then raised the Emperor's sword in her hand and prepared to attack. That being said, even she couldn't guarantee that she would be able to take a blow from the Magic King. The servants who left before were the examples. Destroy them, demon god pillars. Solomon just finished speaking, and the four meat pillars that were wreaking havoc in this underground space began to dance. Immediately, when everyone was at their wits' end, there was a strong fluctuation in the space. A huge dragon claw appeared in this underground space. As if catching an earthworm, the four demon god pillars were uprooted and then directly crushed. Bang! The demon god pillars didn't even leave behind a whale. All of them turned into pure magic and dissipated in the air. Gadatsi and the others looked at the huge dragon claw that was still there with a dumbfounded look. Obviously, they didn't react. However, Pamilia relaxed, as if the reinforcements had come. Mordred said in a displeased tone after sensing the restlessness of the bloodline in her body. TSK, we're too late. Mordred complained, but her tone had already relaxed. Then, when Gadatsi and the others were wondering who saved them, Solomon opened his mouth. I didn't expect you to come here with your original body. Same here. Didn't you also come here with your original body? Wuming's voice came into this space. This voice is Assassin Senior? Because he used his original voice, Matthew easily recognized Wuming's voice. Immediately, the huge dragon claw turned into magic and landed on the ground. Wuming, wearing Assassin's uniform, appeared in front of Gadatsi and the others. Assassin, Gadatsi shouted excitedly and threw herself on Wuming's back. Yes, I'm here. Also, a girl should be reserved. Don't throw yourself on others so easily. Gadatsi nodded and obediently came down from Wuming's back and wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. This couldn't be blamed on Gadatsi. The horror brought by Solomon was not something a little girl who had just become a magician for less than half a year could bear. It could be said that if it wasn't for Matthew's ability to protect her, Gadotsi would probably have mental problems now. That's because you're always reliable, assassin, Gadotsi smiled. It seemed that Wu Ming left a strong impression on Gadotsi when he burned and polluted Winterwood City. There should be a limit to how much you can ignore me. Then, the Magician King roared out angrily. After comforting the frightened Gadotsi, Wu Ming looked at Solomon. You just wanted to kill them, right? The mastermind behind the burning of human rights. Because everyone already knew that the other party was the mastermind behind the burning of human rights. They were not surprised that Wu Ming knew about it. I didn't want to kill them. After all, they are no threat to me, but those people over there have your aura. I can't endure it any longer. Solomon said violently, almost to the point of roaring. Solomon's eyes were blood red at this moment, and his mouth was cracked open like a monster. Black threads also appeared on Solomon's body, and countless magic power was released as if it was free. Wu Ming's eyes narrowed slightly. Taking a closer look, these are not threads, these are all small black mud. Because of the black mud, Solomon had a strong killing intent towards Wu Ming, and this killing intent implicated Gadotsi and others. Then do you want to do it now? I don't mind. Wu Ming became serious and began to release magic power from his body, forming a situation where he was equal to Solomon. But in an instant, Solomon calmed down, and his eyes and mouth returned to normal. I really forgot myself. These things are powerful, but they affect my mood too easily. Wu Ming took a closer look, and the black mud on his body disappeared, or rather, it was sucked back into Solomon's body. You can really restrain yourself. Among the enemies I've met, there's not one like you. Everyone who was related to the black mud would not let Wu Ming go, as if they wanted to kill him. Then, they would be killed by Wu Ming. If they could calm down, they could still have a big impact on Wu Ming. Just like the consciousness of the Star Cup, if it could leave first, and then give the Star Cup to Kaina's, then it would be the only god by using Kaina's body, and Wu Ming in that body would not have the ability to beat it. After all, even the weakest Teto became the only god. Wu Ming did not dare to say that he could beat him. From this, it could be seen that the Magic King was able to suppress his desire for Wu Ming, and could be said to be the ultimate big boss. That's all for now. I'll bring you some good stuff at the next singularity. After saying that, as if afraid that his desire for Wu Ming would flare up again, the Magic King left. It was good that he left. This made Wu Ming worry less. After all, if they fought, Gadotsi and the others behind him would be a burden. Then Gadotsi and the others, who had been silent all this time, began to ask questions. Chapter 466. Hey, who is Assassin to be able to force Solomon to retreat? Do Assassin and Mordred know each other? Why do I feel like Mordred knows you, Assassin? Do you know that, Solomon? I feel like there's a grudge between the two of you. Assassin. Let's stop for a moment. Wu Ming covered Gadotsi's mouth with a headache and stopped Gadotsi from asking any more questions. Wu Ming could understand the excitement when there were so many unknowns and someone who could answer them, but it was still better to let Gadotsi calm down. Then, Matthew said weakly from the side, Senior Assassin, let go of Senior first. Senior is about to suffocate. Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi, who had turned into a mosquito coil, and quickly let go of the hand that was covering Gadotsi's mouth and Gadotsi's nose. I'm saved. Thank you so much, Matthew. Gadotsi looked relieved and touched Matthew's little head. This kind of action made Mashu's face blush. On the other side, Pamela flapped her little wings and came in front of Wu Ming. Then, why did thou come so late? Pamela asked Wu Ming with a haughty expression. You stinky brat. That guy isn't someone you can question. Mordred, on the other hand, had an unhappy look on her face. Huh, what right do thou have to control me? Oh, you're so protective of this guy. Could it be that thou and this guy have an unspeakable relationship? Pamela was angry at first, then started to tease Mordred. It seems like the lesson from before wasn't enough. Mordred raised her royal sword and looked like she was going to fight with Pamela. Thou is the one who hasn't been taught a lesson. Pamela showed her small canine teeth, not to be outdone. From their conversation, Wu Ming deduced that the two of them might have fought, and it ended in a draw. Their relationship is really good, Wu Ming said faintly, no longer caring about the two. That being said, the two of them have caused a lot of trouble. At that moment, the blue-haired servant spoke. My name is Hans Christian Andersen. Just call me Andersen, great unknown being. It's rare for Mr. Andersen to be so serious, Matthew said in surprise. It's just a necessary greeting. Don't make me sound like those two guys over there. Andersen shook his head helplessly. In the end, Mordred and Parmelia were still facing each other. At this moment, Roman's voice came from Gadatsi's wrist. Although I know that everyone has a lot to say, let's hurry up and retrieve the Holy Grail. This underground space is about to collapse. Because of the confrontation between Wu Ming and Solomon, the originally unstable underground space became even more unstable. Sure enough, as soon as Roman finished speaking, the underground space began to collapse. Doctor, you really have a crow's mouth, Matthew complained, quickly ran to the location of the Holy Grail, put down his shield, and began to retrieve the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail has been retrieved. I'm sorry, assassin. Although I would like to talk to you, we have to hurry back to Chaldea. After all, once the Holy Grail was retrieved, the singularity would begin to restore itself. If they didn't leave, then they would be killed by the self-correcting power of history. And now, Andersen and Mordred's body began to dissipate. After all, the Holy Grail was retrieved. Hey, I'll settle this with you next time, Mordred said to Parmelia fiercely. I'll wait for thee. Parmelia also replied, not to be outdone. I can finally leave. With him here, there's nothing for me to do. Goodbye, everyone. Andersen sighed with a melancholy and rejoiced expression, then accelerated the speed of his body's disappearance. Oomph. Mordred looked at Wu Ming, then snorted and disappeared as well. So dishonest, Wu Ming smiled. Then, I'll start the race shift now. Everyone get ready, Roman said through Gadatsi's wristwatch. However, Wu Ming laughed mischievously. Then, how about I go with you, Chaldea, control room. As soon as Parmelia came back, she returned to her small room with the excuse that she was tired and needed to rest. Gadatsi, Matthew, and Wu Ming, the three stood together in front of Roman, who was dumbfounded. I didn't expect you to have such an ability, Roman said gloomily. Wu Ming did come back with Gadatsi and the others, but he did not use the race shift. Instead, he relied on his own ability to fly back with Gadatsi, who had been turned into race shift. Now, although Wu Ming had not reached the state of omnipotence in the use of time and space, he was almost there. Because he had stayed in a route for a long time, Wu Ming was almost reaching adulthood. It could be said that if Wu Ming wanted to fight Solomon just now, he would have a great chance of winning. Well, if I ask for the reason, you should know. Wu Ming's eyes seemed to see through everything as he stared at Roman. Ha, is that so? Roman wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said nervously, I won't be in a hurry to leave. Tachika, Matthew, you two go back and rest first, Wu Ming said to Gadatsi and Matthew. Let's go, Senior. Senior needs to rest. Oh, okay then. See you later. Gadatsi, who saw that Wu Ming wanted to talk to Roman alone, left with Matthew. Although there were other staff in the control room, Wu Ming only needed to use a little trick to let them hear his conversation with Roman. Initially, I felt that there was something wrong with you. Now that I see it, I understand the truth, Wu Ming said in confusion. I'm just a human now, a human who is working hard to restore humanity. Roman didn't feel nervous as before and calmly answered Wu Ming. If that's what you want. Wu Ming shrugged, indicating that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Actually, I want to ask something about you, Roman said after a moment. Is it about why I only showed up now? Or do you want to ask if I will follow Tachika and the others to attack singularities? Wu Ming could almost guess what Roman wanted to ask. After all, there were only a few questions he could ask. Both, and if possible, I hope you can help us, Roman said seriously. Of course, Wu Ming answered without hesitation. This surprised Roman. Didn't I say before that although I have my own enemies, they are generally the same as you? Then, Wu Ming smiled. And I also like humans. Chapter 467. About half an hour later, Gadotsi and Matthew, who couldn't wait to have sex with Wooming, went to the control room together. Why is Assassin missing? Doctor, do you know where he went? Gadotsi asked Roman, who was working at the control console in the control room, when she saw that Wooming was missing. Could it be that Senior Assassin went to Chaldea alone? Matthew asked in confusion. After all, if he wasn't here, it was very likely that he had gone to other places in Chaldea. After all, Chaldea was quite big. No, Assassin suddenly remembered something and left Chaldea. Wooming and Roman knew each other very well for some reason, so Wooming told Roman his name. Assassin left? Gadotsi said rather gloomily. Although Matthew didn't say anything, her sullen expression revealed her uneasiness. Then, Roman smiled when he saw the expressions on the two girls' faces. But Assassin told me to tell you that he will help you at the next singularity. Then, you can have a good gathering. Really? That's great. I have a lot of questions to ask Assassin, Gadotsi said happily. After all, things like the relationship with Mordred, the mysterious dragon claw, the ability to suddenly appear, the ability to appear without the help of the Holy Grail, and so on are all very attractive to Gouda. Not only that, but Gadotsi also paid more attention to the super mysterious identity of Wooming after meeting Stheno on the invisible island of the second singularity and Euryale on the third singularity. Of course, this was also closely related to the deep impression that Wooming left on Gadotsi in Winterwood. Strictly speaking, Wooming was the first servant that Gadotsi had ever met that was gentle, reliable, powerful, and wise, unlike any other servants. Like a big brother next door, Wooming constantly attracted Gadotsi's attention. Since that's the case, let's quickly start the strategy for the fifth singularity. I'm ready, Gadotsi said in high spirits. You're so motivated? Roman was surprised. Matthew also looked at Gadotsi in confusion. Although Gadotsi usually didn't hate the strategy for singularities, she didn't like it either. It was the first time that Matthew saw his senior so motivated. After all, we met Assassin, Gadotsi scratched her head embarrassedly. At that moment, Wooming's little fangirl was born. Although you're ready to attack the next singularity, unfortunately, we haven't completely locked on to the next singularity, so we'll have to wait a little longer. Roman and the other staff members were also very concerned about the singularity. After all, it was the future of mankind. However, they still hadn't fully grasped the location of the singularity. By the way, before Wooming left, he left some information about the next singularity. However, because it was in a hurry, the information he left behind only played a supporting role. After all, Wooming's method of searching for singularities was completely different from Chaldea's method. Although they were similar, they could only play a supporting role. This was also why Chaldea and the others were able to lock on to the fifth singularity so quickly as soon as Gadotsi returned from the fourth singularity. By the way, we didn't disturb the director, right? Roman asked quietly. Gadotsi quickly waved her hand. No. After all, the director just started. What's the word again? Yes, she's in seclusion. We didn't disturb her. Yeah. Matthew nodded. This allowed Roman to breathe a sigh of relief. Ever since Olga Marie returned to Chaldea, she had assumed the position of director and was in charge of the overall situation. However, it seemed like the heavens were playing a joke on her. After returning to Chaldea, Olga Marie was unable to perform the race shift. This made her, who was preparing to go to the first singularity with Gadotsi, stay in the frame like a fool after the race shift was performed. In addition, although Pamilia was not very obedient, at least she was helpful to Gadotsi and the others in attacking singularities. Therefore, Olga Marie decided to let her follow Gadotsi, while she stayed in Chaldea to command. But after a long time, Olga Marie found that Roman was completely capable of taking over her position, and there was also the second servant summoned by Chaldea to assist him. Therefore, Olga Marie decided to study the third method. She had nothing to do, and the third method was close at hand. Olga Marie was not a pedantic person, so she did not hesitate and directly began to study the third method. She had no choice but to study it. Otherwise, she could only be the spirit behind the Holy Grail, unable to escape for the rest of her life. Since then, Olga Marie would go into seclusion from time to study the third method. Coincidentally, a few days ago, Olga Marie just went into seclusion, and now, Woman came to Chaldea. The director is very persistent about assassin Sama. If she knew that assassin Sama came to Chaldea, I don't know what the director would do. Matthew said embarrassedly. One had to know that Sundara's temper tantrums came without warning. Olga Marie had lost her temper several times because of her dreams about Wooming and her dissatisfaction with Pamilia. Basically, Gadotsi and Matthew were in the singularity, so only Roman suffered, which made Roman have a headache. It was a sad story. It's better not to tell her, "You're right, yeah." While Roman and the others were chatting, Wooming encountered a small situation. At the door of the Root, his home, Wooming looked at the entrance of the Root where a lot of black mud had poured in, and there was still countless black mud outside. He was unusually depressed. He had only left for a short while. How could his home be raided? Left with no choice, Wooming temporarily cut off control of his main body and let Collis move his body a little in the air. He instantly flew to the backup machine inside the Root. Opening his ruby dragon eyes that were identical to his main body, Wooming looked gloomily at the black mud that was beginning to erode the Root, trying to take root again. He shook his head with a headache. Fortunately, I held back. Otherwise, it would really be over this time. As Wooming spoke, he activated the power of the Root all over his body, and the safety device inside the Root was activated. Zap, zap, zap. In an instant, countless lightning flashed, and countless black mud were destroyed and evaporated by the lightning produced by the Root. However, the black mud was still a product of the Root, and since it had taken root inside the Root, it was not that easy to destroy. Roar! Then, Wooming controlled his body to fly up. His whole body emitted the lightning of salvation mixed with the power of the Root, and kept sweeping away the black mud of the Root. The black mud of the Root was not to be trifled with either. It immediately turned into huge waves that swept toward Wooming. Even Wooming had to take these two attacks seriously. "I'll definitely guard my home obediently from now on," after muttering in his heart. Wooming seemed to have made an important decision. Using the power of the Root and lightning all over his body, Wooming charged into the waves of black mud and exploded. Boom! The explosion affected all the black mud inside the Root. Even the Root, which did not have a fixed form, seemed to be shaking. That's right, Wooming self-destructed. With the thought of, "You're ruthless, I hate you more," Wooming directly used himself as the starting point to detonate the lightning of salvation mixed with the power of the Root, completely washing away the black mud of the Root. The entire Root seemed to have been washed clean by Wooming's self-destruction and looked very clean. Even the entrance of the Root was blown open by the explosion. At this moment, Wooming's main body in the outside world opened his eyes, flapped his wings, and flew into the Root before the black mud of the Root could reassemble. Chapter 468. Having returned to the Root, Wooming was like an emperor who had ascended to the throne once more, wiping out all the rebels who had taken the opportunity to cause trouble outside. The Root regained its peace. Wooming had a headache as he collected the mana residue left behind by the backup machine's self-destruction, preparing to use the chaotic nature of the Root to reassemble it. After all, this was the Root, and it was something that could be done. And Wooming's headache wasn't because of that, but because of his self-destruction. Because Wooming had used the backup machine just now, Wooming had sacrificed the Rook to save the king, and had perished together with the backup machine's body and the black soil of the Root. As it turned out, the effect was outstanding. However, self-destruction wasn't something that could be done casually. Wooming's body just now wasn't his main body, and therefore self-destructed without any pressure. Then, he was hit by the spiritual impact left behind by the self-destruction. In all kinds of novels, TV shows, movies, and anime, people would see all kinds of people self-destructing. Some were villains who self-destructed. Some were supporting characters who self-destructed to protect the main character. And some were protagonists who self-destructed to kill the big boss. Basically, the result was death. Even if there were resurrections, those who self-destructed would be as spirited as gods because of the invincibility buff they received when they were resurrected. However, Wu Ming had just used the backup machine's body to self-destruct, and then switch back to his main body to attack the black soil of the root that had revived from the ashes. Therefore, Wu Ming suffered a spiritual backlash after the attack. I'm guessing the guy must have tipped off the black soil. Otherwise, how could it be so coincidental? Wu Ming held his head with his dragon claw in discomfort as he continued to collect the residue of his backup machine. The guy that Wu Ming was talking about was the Magic King, who had indeed said, "You actually came here with your main body." It was probably then that he had informed the black soil of the root, and that was when the mindless black soil of the root attacked. As expected, that guy is the real enemy, Wu Ming said with a serious expression. His previous enemies were all affected by the black soil of the root, and were killed by Wu Ming as if they had lost their minds. But this time, the Magic King suppressed the spiritual corruption brought by the black soil of the root, and could even affect the black soil of the root to a small extent. If he could really command the black soil of the root, Wu Ming's nest would have been conquered by the black soil of the root, and Wu Ming would not have to come back to save the situation. In short, the Magic King was Wu Ming's strongest enemy. Wu Ming, ouch, ouch, ouch. Wu Ming's his dragons and his dragon mouth, and again to hold his head to his head. The black soil, the root, the root, the root, the root, the root to the root, the root, the god is he Wu Ming to the magic root, the black, the god of the root, the root, of the root, the root, the root, the root, the root W, the root, the root, the root. His hands did not stop moving. Wu Ming continued to fiddle with his backup computer. But since I'm ready for this feast at Hongmen, if I don't do it properly, I'll be sorry for my identity. As if he thought of something, Wu Ming smiled joyfully. Fifth Singularity, United States. On the streets of the capital, countless strong soldiers patrolled with long spears. Even the outskirts of the city were filled with these soldiers. If Wu Ming was here, he would have covered his face in embarrassment, because these soldiers looked exactly like Wu Ming, but these soldiers seemed to have put on old makeup, and they looked like they were in their 30s or 40s. Furthermore, Wu Ming is an eternally 18-year-old dragon of origin. How can he be old? How can he be old? The White House, Washington. Countless soldiers with Wu Ming's face were stationed everywhere in the White House, including the streets outside the White House. The security was so tight that not even a fly could get in. In the small square in front of the White House, a queen surrounded by soldiers walked to the front. The queen wore a white, fluffy cloak. Because it was deliberate, it could be clearly seen that the queen's body was only wearing white clothes that covered her chest and lower body. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a bikini. The queen didn't care about revealing her skin as she swaggered to the small square. Then, the queen took out a golden cup from her cloak. "Holy Grail, please fulfill my wish." With just a sentence, the golden cup called the Holy Grail emitted a bright light. Then, a magic circle appeared in the center of the small square. It was used for summoning. Along with a burst of light, a figure covered in pure white armor appeared in the magic array. "May I ask, are you my master, Maeve?" The figure looked at the queen, holding the Holy Grail, with a slightly confused expression. "Yes, my little Sai, my king. It's me." Queen Maeve smiled sweetly. Inside the White House, Wu Ming sat on the president's throne, looking at the charming woman in his arms with a headache. That's right, that white figure was none other than Wu Ming. Because he wanted to cheat, in addition to the Holy Grail's enticement, Wu Ming had arrived in a pure white armor that covered even his head. Wu Ming was inside the root. After seeing that the backup machine was almost repaired, he handed the task of repairing the backup machine and upgrading it to Colossus. Meanwhile, he locked onto the Singularity's location and relied on the root to send a servant's body that he had set up in advance. Wu Ming's main body fell into a deep sleep again. He did not dare to leave again. If the house was raided again, the unrepaired backup machine would not be able to help him. Poor Colossus was assigned by Wu Ming to guard the house again. However, Collis was also very happy because Wu-Ming's main body was always with her, so it was not difficult for her to accept it. Then, Wu-Ming opened his eyes and saw Maeve, as well as soldiers with Wu-Ming's face. God knows how awkward it was to see all the soldiers' faces turn into his own. It was like going to the street and finding that everyone's face had turned into his own face. It seems like this is what it's like to have a common face. Ahem. Fortunately, Wu-Ming was wearing a helmet, so even if Maeve was in his arms, she could not see Wu-Ming's awkward face. Wu-Ming watched as Maeve pulled him into the room and made him sit down. Then, Wu-Ming watched as Maeve sat in his arms, rubbed against him, and laughed happily. Only now did Wu-Ming realize what was going on, because Wu-Ming was thinking about the soldiers with Wu-Ming's face. Ahem. In fact, Wu-Ming already knew that Maeve wanted to take him to this empty room to do something embarrassing. After all, it was Maeve, of course. Wu-Ming, who retained his virginity, refused. In the end, she just sat in Wu-Ming's arms and rubbed against him. Long time no see, Maeve. No matter what, it was not wrong to say hello first. Wu-Ming and Maeve had indeed not seen each other for a long time. And then, that's all you want to say, Maeve smiled charmingly and said while hugging Wu-Ming's neck. Now, Wu-Ming only had one thought in his mind, and that was, Maeve, do you feel uncomfortable with this armor? If you feel uncomfortable, then come down. Chapter 469. Of course, Wu-Ming wouldn't say that. If he said that, with Wu-Ming's understanding of Maeve, she would definitely answer that way. It's very uncomfortable. Then little sigh. Take off your armor. How about we do something with love? Ahem. Back to the topic. I only traveled to a lot of places and didn't have time to go back, Wu-Ming said seriously. Oh, is that so? As long as you're not fascinated by other vixens, Maeve said with a smile as if she saw through Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming's heart skipped a beat. If it's Leah, she's not a vixen. She has the blood of the red dragon. But now little Sai only belongs to me, the king who belongs to me. However, Maeve was more reasonable than Wu-Ming thought and didn't care about other things. Let's not talk about this for now. Maeve, the source of this singularity is your holy grail, right? Can you give it to me as compensation? When everything is over, I will use the holy relic to summon you. At that time, you can do whatever you want. Wu-Ming was now putting his virginity on the line for the singularity, and he was afraid that Maeve wouldn't agree. As the first woman who truly loved Wu-Ming, Wu-Ming has her own principles. She won't do anything to force a woman who loves her. It has to be said that Wu-Ming was affected a lot when he was a knight of the Round Table. But this was pardonable. Wu-Ming really stayed in Camelot for a long time. Wu-Ming came there when King Yusef was still in good health, and he was forced to leave when King Arthur unified the British Isles. If it weren't for the fact that he was a scammer in the Sumer area for a long time, Wu-Ming would probably have taken root as a Knight of Justice. However, Wu-Ming didn't think it was bad. Thanks to being a Knight of the Round Table, his character was still quite noble. At least if he had the ability, Wu-Ming would help humans through difficulties. Sure, just as Wu-Ming was distracted again, Maeve answered Wu-Ming. Immediately after, Maeve took out the golden holy grail from her bosom and handed it to Wu-Ming. You gave it to me so easily. Wu-Ming couldn't believe it. After all, this was the holy grail that maintained the singularity. Strictly speaking, it was a treasure that was more valuable than Maeve herself. I believe in Little Sai. As long as it's Little Sai's request, I'll agree. Looking at Maeve's smiling face, Wu-Ming felt that he was quite despicable. Taking advantage of women was not something a knight should do. By the way, the armor Wu-Ming was wearing right now was the one he wore in Camelot. After all, Wu-Ming had cheated quite a lot. In addition to Maeve's wish, Wu-Ming was no longer the Connaught Silver Dragon cylinder. Instead, he existed as a spiritual base that should not have existed. As long as Little Sai is happy, by the way, there's more than one holy grail in this era. With that, Maeve's smile changed in Wu-Ming's eyes. Damn it, so she gave me the holy grail because she had nothing to fear. Forget it, you keep it yourself first, Wu-Ming said weakly. Yes, Maeve smiled slightly and put the holy grail back in her bosom. Explain the current situation to me. Then, Maeve explained to Wu-Ming what happened in the American continent. Because of the Magic King's plan, the American continent was chosen as one of the singularities. Therefore, there was naturally a demon god pillar that held the Holy Grail and served the Magic King. After that person awakened the consciousness of the demon god pillar, he used the Holy Grail to turn this place into a singularity. Then, he used the Holy Grail to summon Maeve. After handing the Holy Grail to Maeve, he left directly. After that, Maeve summoned Wu Ming's cyborg soldier from her blood at lightning speed and directly occupied the capital of the United States, Washington. Because of the influence of the suppression, the Holy Grail also summoned a servant to fight against it. But because it was no match for Maeve, it was directly defeated by Maeve to the west of the American continent, while Maeve occupied the east of the capital, Washington. Just like that, the United States was divided into two parts, east and west. Logically speaking, the fifth singularity should have been like this. However, the Magic King, the mastermind behind the burning of humanity, suddenly jumped out, threw down a few more Holy Grails, and left after saying a few words. Let this place become the battlefield of the mythical war. These were the words left by the Magic King. Since then, several unknown forces inserted themselves into the East-West Division War, and the American continent became truly divided. Wu Ming, accompanied by Maeve, looked at the map in front of him and carefully observed it. Originally, the entire United States should be divided into two parts, east and west, but now, on the map of the United States, it is divided into 5 parts. The eastern part of the United States, with Washington as the center, the Appalachian Mountains, including the area to the east, this is Maeve's camp, represented by white. The entire Great Lakes, as well as the southern part of the Great Lakes, including Chicago, St. Paul, and a small part of the surrounding plains, this is the territory of the unknown enemy, who holds the Holy Grail, represented by yellow. The entire Mississippi Plains, the entire plains is the territory of the unknown enemy, who holds the Holy Grail, represented by red. The entire Rocky Mountains, the Missouri River, and the Southern Mountains, this is the territory of the unknown enemy, who holds the Holy Grail, represented by green. Finally, the westernmost Cordillera Mountains and the western coast, this is the territory of the servants summoned by the Holy Grail to deal with Maeve, represented by black. According to Maeve, the summoned servant was a lion head, and she didn't pay attention to its real name. It has to be said that this lion head servant is still miserable. Including Maeve, there are a total of 4 forces that hold the Holy Grail, and this lion head servant was squeezed to the most difficult terrain in the westernmost area. And now, he can only be said to be relatively lucky. That's right, relatively lucky. It stands to reason that the other Holy Grail forces can completely annex Lionhead, but they didn't do so. The green Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains, which is closest to Lionhead's territory in the Cordillera Mountains, didn't annex Lionhead, not because of mercy, but because they didn't have the opportunity to deal with Lionhead for the time being. In Wu Ming's view, the green Holy Grail forces that are close to Lionhead and hold the Holy Grail forces are fully capable of eliminating Lionhead forces. However, because the other Holy Grail forces are watching in the dark, it is easy to be attacked, so the green Holy Grail forces didn't do anything to Lionhead. Because there are 3 forces that hold the Holy Grail, I directly gave up the territory in the west of the Appalachian Mountains and retreated to the east. I'll let the soldiers temporarily watch them fight each other. It was rare for Maeve to be serious as she analyzed the situation to Wu Ming. And this map is roughly made by me according to the connection between the Holy Grail. Although it is not too detailed, it can still be used as a reference. After all, there is a connection between the Holy Grail, and it is not impossible for Maeve to sense the position of the enemy Holy Grail holders. Then, Wu Ming, who had a headache, was just about to rub his eyebrows, but he realized that he was still wearing his armor, so he put down his hand. That is to say, whether I want to fix this singularity or rule this singularity, I have to take the Holy Grail of the other 3 Holy Grail forces, right? That's right, as expected of my little Sai. But I don't want my little Sai to suffer. In fact, I originally wanted to unify this country and then summon you, but those enemies are really too difficult for us to deal with, so I summoned you. Maeve said, hugging Wu Ming's armored arm. Come on, let's start the war to unify the country. Little sigh, then Wu Ming prayed for Chaldea and the others. Tachika, Matthew, you're on your own. Chapter 470. Although I still don't know the true identity of the enemies, I have a good understanding of them. Maeve said to Wu Ming. Maeve was the queen of Connaught, and she had more than just charm. Among them, the soldiers of the Yellow Grail are the most special. Maeve pointed to the area below the Great Lakes. Their soldiers are Dragon Fang soldiers. From the quality of their battle, there is no doubt that they are the Dragon Fang soldiers that can only be created by the magicians of the gods. However, I don't know if these Dragon Fang soldiers were created by the Traitor Witch. After all, Maeve had not fully understood the situation. Dragon Fang soldiers were skeleton soldiers summoned by the dragon's fangs. The reason why Maeve said whether they were created by the Traitor Witch was because of the magic. Legend has it that the summoning of dragon fangs was a family heirloom magic of the Greek king of Colchis. It was passed down to the princess of Colchis, Medea, who learned magic from the goddess Hecate. In the later generations, she was also known as the Traitor Witch. However, Demetrius was not the only one who knew how to use Dragon Fang soldiers. Wu Ming had also encountered servants who used Dragon Fang soldiers. During the War of the 14 Knights, Empress Semiramis's noble phantasm stored a large number of Dragon Fang soldiers. The number was beyond imagination. Therefore, it cannot be defined based on this clue. Anyway, this Yellow Grail was related to Greece, so it was temporarily named the Greek Grail. Then, Maeve pointed her slender finger to the bottom of the American continent on the map. In the Mississippi Plains, the Grail forces there have ordinary soldiers, but if I'm not mistaken, their emblem is a mother wolf nursing a baby. After Maeve finished, Wu Ming nodded. That means this is the army of Rome. The founder of Rome, Romulus, was raised by a mother wolf. Legend has it that the emblem of Rome at that time was a mother wolf nursing a baby. That's right, I still know about Rome. After all, Rome was established much earlier than Maeve's era. Even Maeve had a general understanding of the situation on the other side of the coast. However, I don't know which emperor it is. Maeve smiled. She did not care about this. And then she hugged Wu Ming again. In her opinion, as long as her king was here, all enemies were nothing. Ahem. Let's call this force the Rome force for now. What about this place? Wu Ming coughed, then pointed to the Rocky Mountains and the eastern mountainous area. This was the third Holy Grail force. What are you talking about? There are no soldiers. My Fu loosened her grip on Wu Ming's arm and continued to explain. Due to the distance, although I don't know which faction it is, I can still sense it through the connection between the Holy Grails. After a slight pause, Maeve continued. In addition to the fact that the other two factions didn't take over the mountain range, this third faction, the Holy Grail faction, took over the mountain range that no one cared about. Maeve's army was merely observing from the top of the Appalachian Mountains. They did not have a deep understanding of the situation. He was lucky to be able to see the dragon-tooth soldiers and the Roman emblem. That's because only these two forces are constantly fighting in the northern part of the Mississippi Plains. No matter if it's Lionhead's native forces in the United States, the third additional Holy Grail force in the Green area, or our Celtic forces, none of them have made any moves. In other words, it's now a turf war between the Greeks and Romans. After digesting this information, Wu Ming said helplessly, "This is really a mythical war now. Celtic Greece, Rome, the United States, and an unknown force." There was no doubt that these were all surprises brought by the Magic King for Wu Ming. Surprises that gave Wu Ming a headache. But I'm a cheating player, Magic King. Then, Wu Ming issued an order. That's it for the time being, Maeve. Our side will stay in the eastern part of the American continent. Yes, my king, now. Wu Ming was really like a king, and Maeve, the queen, began to listen to him. Then, I'll go meet the Greek and Roman soldiers first. You stay here and watch over our home. With that, Wu Ming picked Maeve up and placed her on the seat. He then strode out of the room, leaving Maeve alone in the room. It doesn't matter if he's not the Mad King. The Holy King Sai is really handsome. Our home. Iya. Just like that, the seductive and wanton queen turned into a shy young girl who was yearning for love. In the corridor, Wu Ming walked without saying a word. In order to maintain his dignity, Wu Ming used the corner of his eyes to look at the soldiers with his face guarding the corridor and felt a sense of powerlessness. Why did I believe her in the first place? Wu Ming whispered in a voice that only he could hear. What Wu Ming was talking about was naturally the time when he gave Mavis blood essence to create the cyborgs. But even so, Wu Ming also led this group of cyborgs in a battle. I didn't feel ashamed at the time. Was I in a state similar to Chinibu at the time? Shaking his head and his heart, Wu Ming gave up thinking about nonsense. When he walked to the gate of the White House, Wu Ming waved his arm, and a blood-red cloak appeared behind the pure, white holy armor. The blood-red cloak matched with the holy armor, but it did not become dirty. Instead, it highlighted Wu Ming's holiness even more. Farewell, Holy King. Suddenly, all the Celtic soldiers with Wu Ming's face knelt down and roared at Wu Ming. Wu Ming was startled. What the hell is with this roar? It's as if they want to beat up Wu Ming. I can only say that they are indeed Celts, however, for the sake of his dignity. Wu Ming did not show any surprise. Wu Ming responded indifferently. Then, with a wave of his hand, a pure, white holy spear appeared in his hand. Wu Ming tossed the holy spear in his hand, and it transformed into a pure white deer beast smaller than Fumbaba. But don't be mistaken, Wu Ming's Fumbaba was left behind in Uruk. This was only because Wu Ming transformed the holy spear in his current state. In short, it was still the holy spear Yggdrasil, but in a different shape. Wu, the deer beast, lightly responded, and Wu Ming immediately jumped onto the deer beast's back. Wu Ming, who was wearing armor, looked extremely suitable riding on the deer beast that was much smaller than Fumbaba. After all, this was the mount that Wu Ming transformed into himself, so it was definitely suitable. Wu! The deer beast responded softly again and carried Wu Ming into the distance. That was the location of the Appalachian Mountains. Wu Ming planned to cross the Appalachian Mountains directly to his destination, the northern Mississippi plains where constant battles occurred. Chapter 471. At the top of the Appalachian Mountains, Wu Ming rode his deer beast to the top of the mountain. Then, Wu Ming jumped off the deer beast and looked into the distance. Ka-ka! Along with a cracking sound, the helmet on Silent Cry's head that looked like it had grown dragon horns automatically separated like Mordred's helmet, attaching itself to his shoulders and back. Wu Ming, who finally revealed his head, couldn't help but take a deep breath. Phew, the air in the mountains is indeed very cool. Wu Ming looked around with his eyes that had turned golden because of the Holy King. It's called the Great Mythological War, and it's not wrong at all. Wu Ming could clearly feel that the mana density of this singularity was continuously increasing. Although it was probably because of the Magic King, but is the excessive use of the Holy Grail a side effect on the singularity? Wu Ming pondered. After all, how do you think the Dragon Fang soldiers, Roman soldiers, and Wu Ming Celtic soldiers were mass-produced? Even Maeve wouldn't be able to summon enough soldiers to occupy half of America in a short period of time without using the Holy Grail. It was probably the same for the Dragon Fang and Roman soldiers. I wonder how many lone servants there are on this continent, Wu Ming said as he looked down at the battlefield that seemed to have already begun. Wu Ming learned from Roman that the Holy Grail of every singularity would summon a lot of lone servants. Therefore, Wu Ming was thinking about the lone servants. If we can rope him in, he will be of great help to Tachika. However, he had to have the opportunity to meet a good lone follower. Then, Wu Ming closed his helmet and sat on the white deer beast again. Oh! Wu Ming rode the deer and galloped toward the foot of the mountain. His scarlet cape fluttered in the wind, making rustling noises. At the foot of the mountain, not far from the northern battlefield of the Mississippi Plains, in the north was a group of ferocious-looking skeleton soldiers that didn't look human, the Dragon Tooth soldiers. Some of the Dragon Teeth soldiers were holding large bone blades, some were holding long-boned spears, and some were holding curved-boned bows. They were arranged in an extremely orderly manner. In the south was a group of Roman soldiers wearing old but tough leather armor. The Roman soldiers were basically armed with spears, shields, and short swords at their waists. Both armies were heavily guarded, and there were no commanders in sight. It was as if they were about to engage in a daily battle. Both armies moved and began to attack each other. The vanguard of both sides made contact. There was no flashy exchange of blows. It was just a mutual attack of you with a saber and I with a spear, you with a sword and I with a shield. It had to be said that such a battle was merely a matter of who had more troops. However, for both sides who possessed the Holy Grail, this was indeed a terrible idea. Therefore, after such a long battle, it was time for them to change their strategy. For example, taking a picture of a general or something. Roar! All of a sudden, an inhuman roar sounded from behind the Dragon Fang soldiers. Then, a huge black figure jumped into the camp of the Roman soldiers. Boom! When the black figure landed in the camp of the Roman soldiers, it directly caused a violent impact to the Roman soldiers. Roar! The black figure roared again. It was holding a strange stone axe. It was a 5-meter tall figure. Its whole body was naked, and only the lower half of its body was wearing a tattered combat uniform. Its naked body had a healthy dark complexion. Its muscles were bound, and its wrists and ankles were shackled. His eyes were filled with madness. Without a doubt, this was a berserker. If Wu Ming was here, he would definitely be surprised. This was the berserker that they met in Winterwood City. His real name was Hercules. Hercules was constantly waving his axe and sword as he began to massacre the Roman soldiers. It had to be said that a berserker was indeed a berserker. His destructive power was not to be underestimated. In just a few minutes, more than half of the Roman soldiers were killed or injured. However, since the Dragon Fang soldiers had already sent a general, the Roman soldiers had no choice but to send a general as well. Immediately afterward, a red-eyed man, wearing ancient golden Roman armor, a battle skirt, and a tattered red cloak behind him rushed over with a roar. He seemed to be a berserker as well. Ow, ow, ow. Roar. The two berserkers roared at each other and began a fight. The Greek berserker swung his huge axe and sword and attacked the Roman berserker. On the other hand, the Roman berserker was not afraid of pain. He carried his axe and sword and attacked the Greek berserker. The two berserkers with similar strength and durability were fighting each other just like that. After a few moves, the Roman berserker was clearly at a disadvantage and was beginning to be suppressed by the Greek berserker. There is no doubt that if there were no reinforcements or something special happened, Rome's berserker would definitely die. Ow, ow, ow! The Roman berserker roared unwillingly. Suddenly, a ray of moonlight appeared in the sky and shone around the Roman berserker. That was the Roman berserker's noble phantasm. It could cause mental damage to the enemies in the surrounding area. Roar! It could only be said that Hercules was indeed worthy of his name. Even if he had gone berserk, it could be said that because he had gone berserk, the enemy's noble phantasm had no effect on him. However, the surrounding Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers could not. The Roman soldiers began to go berserk. Kata, kata, kata! The Dragon Fang soldiers also went berserk. Then, the Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers who were affected by the Roman berserker's noble phantasm began to attack Hercules crazily. Roar! Ants could even kill an elephant. However, to Hercules, these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers were not ants. At most, they could only affect Hercules. Hercules crazily crushed these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers and began to attack indiscriminately. As long as they were close to him, they would be smashed into pieces by Hercules' axe. However, the Roman berserker was also among them, constantly attacking Hercules. The Roman berserker, who could match Hercules' strength, could cause damage to Hercules with every attack. This was what they meant by ants could kill an elephant. Of course, that referred to Hercules being attacked by the Roman berserker. At that moment, There was a sudden magical fluctuation not far away from the two servants, and the two berserkers could not help but look over there. With a flash of light, two figures appeared in the same place. Reiki transfer normal. Tachika, Matthew, you have come to the United States in 1783. Roman's voice came from Gadatsi's wrist. It was Matthew who was wearing Chaldea's master clothes and Galahad's Reiki suit. Doctor, are you sure this is the United States in 1783? Gadatsi and Matthew looked at the battlefield in horror. Was there such a fierce battle in the United States at that time? Coincidentally, Hercules and Rome's berserker were looking at the two unknown enemies who had entered the battlefield. Gadatsi and Matthew could not help but swallow their saliva. It feels like we're finished. Chapter 472. Roar. Ah! Hercules and Rome's berserker roared in unison, as if they were extremely angry at their former enemy who had suddenly entered the battlefield. It's over. That's Hercules and Caligula. Gadatsi shouted in a panic. They were the enemies that Gadatsi and Matthew encountered at the second and third singularities. As if they also had an impression of Gadatsi and Matthew, Hercules and Caligula roared and ran towards the two. Senior, please step back. Matthew raised his shield and stood in front of Gadatsi. Hercules raised his axe and sword and smashed it down at Matthew. Clang! The sword and axe collided with the holy shield, producing an ear-piercing sound. Huh! After blocking Hercules' attack, Matthew shouted and pushed Hercules away. After experiencing 4 singularities, Matthew had indeed become a lot stronger. Hercules was a humanoid Gundam whose strength had reached A+. Even though it was not easy for Matthew to block his full-powered attack, he was still able to do so. Senior, it's too dangerous here. Prepare to break out of the battlefield, Matthew said to Gadatsi, without looking back. Gadatsi was not an idiot. The Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers had begun to surround them. No matter what, they had to leave the battlefield first. When a scholar meets a soldier, it is difficult to reason with him. This was probably the case. No matter which side it was, there was no way to communicate with them at the moment, so it was best to leave now. Senior, Matthew shouted and stood in front of Caligula, who wanted to attack Gadatsi. Doctor, is Miss Pomelia not ready yet? Gadatsi quickly said to her wrist while Matthew blocked Caligula. Pomelia was sleeping because of the habits of vampires, so she did not follow Matthew and others. It's too late, Tachika. Although it's a bit irresponsible to say this now, we can only rely on you and Matthew now. Roman's helpless voice came from the watch. Oh, really? If only Assassin was here, Gadatsi complained. As if the heavens were playing a joke, a rather huge source of magic was quickly approaching them. It was the power of light, the extreme light that could illuminate all darkness. Tachika, Matthew, there's a huge source of magic approaching you. It's impossible to determine whether it's an enemy or not. Be careful, Roman said excitedly. Doctor, we've already seen it here. Gadatsi complained to Roman. In the east of the battlefield, like the rising sun, a fierce light shone and quickly impacted the camps of both sides. Roar dash! Oh! Hercules, who was about to attack Gadatsi again, and Caligula, who was blocked by Matthew, both turned their heads and looked at the light. It seems that the two berserkers judged that this light was more to be targeted than the enemy. Hercules and Caligula gave up attacking Gadatsi and Matthew and headed towards the source of the light in the east. Anyway, we're saved, Gadatsi sighed. However, even without the two threats of Hercules and Caligula, the surrounding Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers were not to be trifled with. Surprisingly, the quality of these two soldiers was quite high. Matthew used his shield to knock away one enemy after another, and quickly said to Gadatsi, Senior, let's take advantage of this opportunity to break through. Because of Hercules' hammer and Caligula's noble phantasm, the Roman soldiers and Dragon-Teeth soldiers around Gadatsi and Mashu were not gathered together. Therefore, they were confident to break through the encirclement. Quick, Matthew, let's leave quickly. Then, Matthew covered Gadotsi, and the two broke through to the west. Why break through to the west? What a joke! The light in the east was not to be trifled with. If they didn't hurry to the west, they would be waiting for death. Because of this, Gadotsi and Wuming were getting farther and farther away in the east where the light was. Silent Wonder held the holy white spear in his hand and destroyed the Roman soldiers and Dragonfang soldiers that were rushing forward as if he was unparalleled. With this level of soldiers, the enemy must have used the Holy Grail, Wuming said while mowing the grass. Although Wuming was mowing the grass, the strength of these Roman soldiers and Dragonfang soldiers was already very high. Wuming had also encountered Dragonfang soldiers, but compared to these Dragonfang soldiers, those Dragonfang soldiers were simply broken bones. Naturally, the Roman soldiers who were comparable to the Dragonfangs were also extremely strong. Simply put, the original green monsters with good quality had become orange monsters with epic quality. In any case, they're just mass-produced soldiers. Not to mention the Dragonfang soldiers, the Roman soldiers were exactly the same, and there was no fear in them. There was no doubt that they were summoned using the Holy Grail. It was the same as Wuming's Celtic soldiers. It's about time. Using normal attacks to clear the monsters was too slow, so Wuming prepared to use a skill. Silent Wonder swept away all the enemies around him. Then he pointed the holy lance Yggdrasil downwards and stabbed it into the ground. Feel the radiance of the Holy King, Wuming said as he injected magic into the holy spear. Boom! In an instant, the magic of light was released and overturned the soldiers and the ground, causing a violent explosion. The scorching light purified the enemies and the ground. Wuming stood in a large crater that looked like it was hit by a meteorite and pulled out the holy spear that was still stuck in the ground. Holy King's Radiance. Ace the descent of the Holy King. The radiance of mercy accompanied the Holy King. The effect could be said to be similar to the Ghost Seed demon skill. It was a combination of natural demon, strange strength, charm, magic release, and so on. Wuming used the effect of the light magic release. It had to be said that the effect was outstanding. Wuming's attack just now almost changed the terrain of the northeastern Mississippi plains, and the attacking Roman soldiers and Dragonfang soldiers were basically wiped out. Roar! Oh! Suddenly, two different roars were heard, and two figures appeared at the edge of the crater. Is that Hercules and the unknown berserker? Wuming knew Hercules because he had met him before. However, Wuming really did not know Berserker, who was like an emperor. However, this did not hinder Wuming. Both of them did not come with good intentions. Mythical Yggdrasil. Chapter 473. Mythical Yggdrasil. Wuming didn't say anything and directly released the true name of the Holy Spear. The originally solid Holy Spear in his hand seemed to have turned into light, shining with infinite brilliance. Even Hercules and Caligula couldn't help but raise their arms to block the dazzling brilliance. Pure brilliance, holy world tree, help me purify the evil. Wuming shouted loudly and threw the Aurora pillar in his hand like a javelin at Caligula. After all, Wuming didn't know Caligula well and didn't know if he was a strong threat. But Wuming knew that Hercules could resurrect 11 times, and he would be immune to all attacks he had received. Therefore, Wuming chose to get rid of Caligula, the unknown berserker, first. Ah! The intense pain made Caligula roar. The spear of light hit Caligula's body at a speed that Caligula couldn't react to. It passed through his body and left a glowing hole in his body. Bang! Then, Caligula exploded and overturned Hercules, who didn't have time to leave Caligula's side. This was the power of Wuming. No, it should be the light of the Holy King. At this point, the Roman berserker, Caligula, was eliminated. Roar! Hercules got up and roared at Wuming. Next, it's your turn. Wuming waved his hand, and the holy spear that had turned into light returned to Wuming's hand and turned into a solid object. It had to be said that Hercules' 12 trials, God Hand, was really powerful. It was even more cheating than Wuming, who cheated. It was immune to B-level damage and could resurrect 11 times. It had a strong resistance to attacks that killed it once. If the master's aptitude was high and had enough magic, the number of resurrections that were lost could be recovered. Even if Wuming was extremely powerful now, he couldn't be sure that he could kill Hercules and make him leave. "But I don't need to kill you. I just need to defeat you," Wuming said as he rushed toward Hercules with his spear. Roar! Hercules saw the man in white armor running toward him and roared crazily. After all, Hercules was a demigod hero and could be said to be the most famous hero in Greece. Even if he was a berserker and had lost his mind, he had his own pride. How could Hercules be afraid of his opponent, who was also a berserker, who had unleashed his noble phantasm right from the start? He just looked a little fairer than him, had more mana, and was on par with him in terms of ability value. He just looked a little prettier than him. Roar! I, Hercules, am not afraid. Along with the roar, Hercules jumped up and raised his axe to attack Wuming. Even if Hercules had lost most of his mind, his body's instinct was still there. His instinct allowed Hercules to hit Wuming directly. Dong! There was a small hole in the pit that was originally a big one. The small hole was filled with smoke and dust. Whoosh! A white spear came out of the smoke and swept across. Wuming swept the smoke and dust away. There was not a single speck of dust on his white armor. When Hercules was about to hit him with his sword, Wuming used his holy spear to block it. In addition to his relic, Arthur's gift armor, even without the protection of his holy spear, Wuming did not suffer any damage when Hercules hit him. To put it simply, Wuming's relic was tougher than Hercules' body from the 12 trials. Roar! Perhaps Hercules saw that his attack was ineffective. He roared again and rushed toward Wuming. When Wuming saw Hercules rushing toward him, he reached behind him and grabbed his cloak. He threw the cloak at Hercules. Hercules cut the cloak in half with his sword and axe. The cloak turned into magic particles and drifted away with the wind. Following that, the tip of the spear appeared in front of Hercules. The tip of the spear was aimed at Hercules' head. However, how could it hit Hercules, who had mind's eye? Hercules turned his head and easily dodged the attack. Roar! Following that, Hercules roared and swept his sword and axe at Wuming, who was close to him. After Wuming's attack failed, he held the end of the spear and used the holy spear as a pole. He inserted it into the ground behind Hercules. When Hercules' sword and axe swept over, he jumped and came behind Hercules. The surrounding magic instantly gathered, and light appeared behind Hercules. Dong! His foot, which contained the magic of light, kicked Hercules from behind. Hercules was kicked to the bottom of the pit by silent sound. After all, both of them were now fighting on the slope of the giant pit. Wuming's kick, coupled with the influence of gravity, caused Hercules to roll toward the center of the giant pit. Wuming took back his leg that was still moving because of the kick. He stood firm and pulled out the holy spear from the ground. Wuming's kick just now had reached the A level, and it was slightly higher. Even Hercules couldn't withstand this attack. However, although he was injured, it certainly wouldn't have a big impact on the battle. Hercules inserted his sword and axe into the ground on the way to the bottom of the pit. He stopped abruptly and then turned over. Roar! Hercules was even more enraged by Wuming's humiliation of the Greek hero. At this moment, Wuming heard a voice. Phoebus' catastrophe complain of arrows. Show. In an instant, countless dark green arrows wrapped in strong magic power came down from the sky, and the arrow formation fell straight towards Silent Wonder. Boom, boom, boom. Wuming was buried by the arrow formation. The smoke produced by the arrow formation filled the big pit. Then, a spaceship appeared in the air. As the name suggested, it was a spaceship. It was a gorgeous sailboat that flew into the sky. A green figure stood on the bow, still in the posture of drawing a bow. After seeing her noble phantasm hit Wuming, Atlantis spoke. Come back, Hercules, Atlantis said to Hercules in a steady tone that was neither commanding nor pleading. Roar! Although Hercules did not listen to the words of the Greek Holy Grail holder when he was summoned, Hercules would still listen to Atlanta a little. Immediately, Hercules jumped onto the spaceship. Then, Atlanta looked at the place where the smoke was gradually dissipating. Although Atlanta's noble phantasm was a B level, for Wooming, who could even block Hercules' attack, each arrow alone could not threaten him at all. Even if Atlanta deliberately concentrated the arrows, it was estimated that it would not cause any harm to Wooming. This was indeed the case. When the smoke was completely dispersed, Wooming's spotless figure was still standing in the big pit that was almost destroyed. Such a familiar, noble phantasm. I guess it must be you, Wooming said lightly. Chapter 474. Although Wooming's voice was not loud, Atlanta, who had a particularly good hearing, still heard it. I don't know you, Celtic hero. Atlanta held the heavenly bow blessed by Artemis and aimed at Wooming again. Although Atlanta kept saying that she didn't know Wooming, Wooming remembered Atlanta, and there was a reason why Atlanta didn't know Wooming. Servants were the avatars of heroic spirits, and each avatar was different. To put it simply, the main body was divided into many avatars, and what you know is just one of the avatars. Therefore, if you thought that you had met a servant in the Holy Grail War, you would be wrong to think that he or she knew you and befriended you when you saw him or her in other places. In the next second, he or she is likely to kill you because he or she is not the first avatar that you know. He or she may be the second avatar, the third avatar, or even the infinite avatar. Therefore, the current Atlanta was probably not the Atlanta of the 14 Horsemen, but there was another possibility. Wooming was now fully armed, and his face was covered. Atlanta may have said that she didn't know him because she couldn't see Wooming's face. In any case, even if Atlanta knew Wooming, the two of them among the 14 Horsemen were opponents. In addition, Wooming hadn't figured out the situation of the spaceship yet. Wooming didn't think that Atlanta could come to his side. Unfortunately, I know you. Wooming's slightly helpless voice came from under the armor. Wooming began to be vigilant. His fingers slid, and the defensive Loon rune appeared and attached to Wooming's armor. Atlanta's strength was quite low, but the heavenly bow blessed by moon god Artemis, when the arrow was fully drawn, the damage had reached A class, which meant that it could hurt Hercules. However, Wooming's armor could defend against A class physical attacks. It stood to reason that Atlanta couldn't hurt Wooming. But in case there were other servants on the ship who were ready to attack Wooming, then the probability of Wooming capsizing would be high. At that moment, a disgusting voice came from the ship, as if that person was a scum. What are you doing? Atlanta, why don't you shoot the arrow? Although he couldn't see the person, Wooming could be sure that the owner of the voice was not a good person. From Atlanta's Frowns' face. With all due respect, Ison, our original plan was to retreat after retrieving Hercules. Atlanta did not put down the heavenly bow, nor did she shoot an arrow at Silent Cry. Instead, she said without looking back, hearing this name Atlanta of, as people who knew a little about Greek mythology should know the story of the Argo hero ship. It was an adventure ship that gathered many Greek heroes, including Hercules and Atlanta, to search for the Golden Fleece. However, many people might not know but it was not wrong. In Greek mythology, was not very famous. It was because he was the captain and initiator of the Argo hero ship that has had a little fame. He was arrogant and domineering, proud and naive, easy to be deceived. He successfully regained the throne by relying on the power of Demetrius, whom he had swindled. After marriage, he abandoned Demetrius. As a result, Demetrius took revenge on him. In the end, because of the curse of the goddess of beauty Aphrodite, he was killed by the heavy wood that fell from the Argo hero ship. In this way, this ship must be the Argo hero ship. Hercules, Atlanta, and is on the ship were the best proof. Tisk, you woman. Ison's angry voice rang out. Because the ship stopped above Wooming's head, Wooming could not see or anyone else on the ship. He could only see Atlanta standing on the side of the ship. Of course, even so, Wooming could not appreciate the scenery under Atlanta's skirt. After all, the angle was not quite right. Cough, cough. Immediately afterward, Atlanta jumped back to the ship, and the Argo hero ship immediately moved and began to drive toward the location of the Great Lakes in the north. "Want to go? Ask my gun first," Wu Ming said as he swung his gun and was ready to release his noble phantasm again. The bottom of the Argo hero ship and Wu Ming's light gun. Which one was more powerful? Probably everyone knew that, and the servants on the Argo hero ship naturally understood this truth. As a result, countless magic circles appeared around the Argo hero ship in a composite form, and then the magic circles began to gather energy. Judging by the concentration of magic, Wu Ming judged that the power of these magic circles was not small. Although it was not as powerful as a noble phantasm, it was enough to cause damage to Wu Ming. It seemed that the magician on the Argo hero ship had already begun to chant. Otherwise, there would not be so many powerful magic circles appearing in an instant. And the target of these magic circles was naturally Wu Ming. In the blink of an eye, the mana in the magic array finished gathering and fired its silent wonder. Like a heavy downpour, countless mana pillars that could melt steel poured down from the sky. Boom! Damn! The explosion caused by the mana pillar deepened the crater even further. Then, a light gun flew out of the center of the explosion. Mythical Yggdrasil! Boom! The light gun directly hit the Argo hero ship, penetrating through the bottom of the ship and coming out from the deck, blasting a big hole in the bottom of the ship. The Argo hero ship started to smoke as if it had been shot. Then, Isen's panic screams came from the Argo hero ship. "Ah, my ship! Quick, quick! Quick, quick, quick!" Demetrius quickly used spatial magic. Then, the entire ship disappeared. Without a doubt, the Argo hero ship had been transported away by Demetrius, who Isen was talking about. Demetrius. That means these magic circles were all created by her, and those Dragonfang soldiers were probably created by her too. Wu Ming's voice came from the center of the explosion. Gradually, the explosion dissipated, and Wu Ming's figure was revealed in the pit that had become even deeper. His armor was still spotless. Wu Ming waved his hand, and the holy spear returned to his hand. That spatial magic was probably set up on the Argo hero ship in advance as a precaution. After all, using spatial magic to transport such a large ship was absolutely impossible. Then, Wu Ming sensed the reaction of the servants around him and said lightly, "Using the defensive loom magic in advance is really the right choice." After all, after Atlanta used her noble phantasm, Wu Ming cast a defensive loon rune on himself because he was afraid that there would be more powerful attacks. Otherwise, Wu Ming would be injured by Demetrius's magic, even with the noble phantasm Arthur's gift. If he was injured, it would be a bit difficult to deal with the new servants. Immediately, Wu Ming looked at the edge of the giant pit, and 4 servants appeared. Chapter 475. What a spectacular scene! A fat man dressed in red and yellow said leisurely, just like an emperor. "Caesar-sama, I just received a message from the god ancestor. Caligula has left the battlefield." A woman wearing an ancient blue dress next to the fat man said, "Ah, I know. Cleopatra. Then, the murderer must be this king." Caesar said, looking at Wu Ming. The holy white armor, the holy spear, whether it was Caesar or Cleopatra, they didn't think that the enemy was easy to deal with. The scene of Wu Ming piercing Argo's noble phantasm was still in their minds. However, these two are not easy to deal with. As he spoke, Caesar glanced at the red-haired young arrogant king and the black-haired frivolous swordsman with his small eyes that appeared to be too fat. "Cedo, the rest of Cedo. Cedo's aura is here. Damn it, those Greek hyenas, I will never let you go." The young king roared angrily. "Well, he doesn't look easy to deal with now." Caesar smiled and waved his hand. "Oh, Celander, I didn't expect you to descend in this way. I thought Maeve would use the Holy Grail to distort you into the Mad King." The frivolous black-haired man greeted Wu Ming, then jumped into the huge pit with his huge spiral sword. "Fergus, were you also summoned by Maeve?" Wu Ming calmly looked at his old friend, who was killed by Gil in Winterwood City. Not to mention that he still couldn't remember what happened in Fuyuki City. Moreover, the Celtic warriors weren't people that could be held on to by trivial matters. Let's not talk about this for now. The two over there are servants from Rome, and the one on the other side is the hero of India, Rama. Let's talk about the details later. Fergus said and retreated behind Wooming. Looking at the fresh wound on Fergus' chest, there was no doubt that Fergus was seriously injured. Don't look at how frivolous Fergus' words were. He was already at his limit. The wound extended from his left shoulder to his right abdomen. Although the bleeding had temporarily stopped, Fergus probably wouldn't be able to fight anymore. Then go back to Washington. You'll just be a burden if you stay here, Wooming said without looking back. Then I'll leave it to you. Fergus smiled and left while whistling. Wooming first looked at Caesar and Cleopatra before looking at the red-haired Rama. The name Rama reminded Wooming of the last king of the god slayers, who was also Rama. The two of them were the Rama of their respective worlds, but they would not have any connection. You're a Celtic too, right? In that case, you are also responsible for what happened to Cedo. Bear it properly for me. Rama shouted furiously as he raised the undying blade in his hand. Brahmastra, indestructible Rakshasa. After activating his noble phantasm, Rama threw the undying blade at Wooming. Among them, the lightning and flame on the undying blade made Wooming nervous. According to the type, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa was a magic noble phantasm, but that didn't mean that magic noble phantasm couldn't attack non-magic. And in terms of level, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, indestructible Rakshasa, indestructible Rakshasa, indestructible Rakshasa, indestructible Rakshasa, indestructible Rakshasa, indestructible Rakshasa was an A+ noble phantasm. This made Wooming curse in his heart. What the F***CK? Even if Wooming had the noble phantasm Arthur's gift and the Loon defense rune, Wooming wouldn't dare to take that attack head-on. What if I hang up? Wooming didn't have any powerful defensive noble phantasm or defensive ability, so Wooming used the skill Holy King's Glory. Wooming crazily squeezed the magical power in his body. In an instant, endless light shone from Wooming's body. Even Caesar and Crowbard, who were servants, couldn't bear the light and directly raised their arms. And Rama was the same. Of course, Wooming didn't intend to use this skill to resist, but to use magical power to release it. The legend of the Holy King. Rama raised the Holy Lance, and with a magical power provided by Wooming that was equivalent to 3 noble phantasms, the Holy Lance turned into a huge light cannon. Then, Wooming threw it heavily. Boom! Rumble! When the indestructible blade came into contact with the light cannon, there was silence at first. Then there was an explosion. The aftermath of the explosion was comparable to that of a nuclear bomb. Caesar, Cleopatra, and Rama were blown away. Even Fergus, who had just walked a short distance away, was affected. However, even though Fergus had walked a long distance away from the big pit, he was still affected by the explosion. It was enough to see the power of Wooming's noble phantasm. Fergus inserted the neon sword deep into the ground and held the hilt with difficulty to prevent it from being blown away. After about 10 seconds, the storm stopped. Well, Celander is too reckless. Even if he has a lot of magical power, he can't do whatever he wants. Although he complained, Fergus had a smile on his face. After all, the Celtics were considered a fighting race. Fergus looked at the area behind him. As if it was swallowed by the explosion, the whole big pit could no longer be seen because it was all white. Well, I'm injured. I'll let him do it himself. After that, Fergus carried his spiral sword and walked toward Washington. After a long time, the white substance dissipated, and a barren plain was revealed under the sky. Why was it a plain? Because the explosion directly dug out a piece of the area. In short, it was actually a flat basin. That was the trump card of a servant, the power of a noble phantasm, which was powerful enough to change the terrain. Of course, to be able to turn the surrounding hundreds of hectares of plain into a basin was not something that could be done casually by a servant. At least, Fergus could not do it. At most, he could only scorch the land in front of him that was tens of thousands of meters long and thousands of meters wide. At that moment, a white hand suddenly stretched out from the ground of the basin. Taking a closer look, it was not a white hand. It was obviously a white gauntlet with a white gauntlet. Wu Ming climbed out of the ground. The white armor was slightly dim at the moment. Wu Ming supported his body with the holy lance and looked around. This holy king's body is a bit scary. I just used 3 times more mana to supply the noble phantasm, plus a super strong mana release, and the explosion was so amazing. While ordinary servants would be drained of their mana in an instant if they did that, only Wu Ming, who had a special ability, dared to do that. Mana amplification EX, the perfect attribute of the root dragon. No matter what class, the root dragon's mana was almost unlimited, and it was not affected by the class. Because of his almost limitless magic, coupled with his cheat code and Maeve's use of the Holy Grail, Silent Cry has really become able to do whatever he wants. Rama, Caesar, and the others, I'm afraid they would have been blown away. Because Wu Ming was in the center of the big pit, Wu Ming was buried underground. Rama and the others, who were at the edge of the big pit, were unlikely to be buried underground. It was very likely that they would have been blown away. Forget it. Let's leave it at that for the time being. The information collection is almost done. After that, Wu Ming also began to move toward Washington. Good heavens. So the reason for this nuclear flattening was to gather intelligence. Chapter 476. Logically speaking, there should be a lot of local residents around the basin that was turned from a plain to a nuclear flattened. However, the surrounding area was subconsciously identified as a battlefield by Greece and Rome. Therefore, the local residents in this area were evacuated by Greece and Rome. Both Greece and Rome set up capital cities in their respective territories and gathered the people as if they were establishing a country. The people, on the other hand, chose a side to join in order to protect themselves. It's really beyond my expectations. I thought they wouldn't care about the life and death of the local residents. Wu Ming sat in the president's seat and casually flipped through the information collected by Maeve after Wu Ming left. At this moment, Wu Ming's originally battered armor was restored to its holy state. There was no doubt that Maeve directly used a command spell to restore Wu Ming to his full state. This is not surprising. After all, both sides have similar leaders. Maeve stood behind Wu Ming and said with a smile while hugging Wu Ming's neck. Rome's words were still understandable. After all, it was Caligula and Caesar. It was normal for them to build a city. On the other hand, Greece was more than happy to play the king's game. After all, Greece had Jason. That guy used women for revenge. If he used them, then so be it. After becoming a king, marry her and live an honest life. But in the end, you abandoned her. Although both sides had leaders, neither Wu Ming nor Maeve would agree with such a man. There are also residents in our territory, right? Wu Ming continued to look at the information and said to Maeve without looking back. That's right, because Sai became the Holy King. The original plan to kill everything was cancelled. Maeve said calmly. She didn't find it strange that she said to kill everything. After Maeve occupied Washington, or rather, after occupying half of the United States, before she could do anything to the local residents, the other Holy Grail forces came and divided the United States, which was originally divided into 2 parts, into 5 parts. Maeve then retreated to Washington. After that, Maeve decided to establish her capital in Washington. She was no longer in the mood to kill. A few days later, Maeve summoned Wu Ming. After that, because of the Holy King's reputation, Mai Fu also changed her policies. She started to treat it like a country and no longer had any bad intentions. Only the Holy Grail faction that occupied the Rocky Mountains had no intention of building a city there. The Rocky Mountains were already lacking in population. As a result, a small portion of the population migrated to Greece and Rome. Of course, the westernmost force of the United States, the Lionhead, represented the United States from the very beginning. If it were not for the Rocky Mountains, the people of the American continent would have run over to the Lionhead. Now, regardless of whether they were forced or not, the natives were living in the Celtic territory. After all, as long as little Sai wants to do something, I will accompany you. If you become the wise mad king, I will become your bloody queen. I will fight alongside you. If you become the holy king, I will become your holy queen. I will rule the kingdom with you. That is my wish. I will accompany you until the day I die. Maeve's usual charm was gone. At this moment, she was really like an ordinary girl accompanying her sweetheart. She hugged Wu Ming gently. When he was summoned by the Holy Grail, Wu Ming heard Maeve's wish. Not a king who can kill with me, but a king who can make me accompany you. Wu Ming fell silent. What man would reject a girl who was willing to do anything for him? Indeed, Wu Ming's initial interest in Maeve was not because he coveted Maeve's beauty. It was because he was a greenhorn and could not help but be interested in the things around him. Wu Ming had just changed from an ordinary person to the identity of the root dragon. He had also learned from Ska. When he went out to Connaught, it was a pity that he did not see Maeve, who had played all the Celtic heroes in the palm of her hand. After all, he was young and frivolous. The reason why Maeve fell in love with Wu Ming was not only because of his heroic act of saving the damsel in distress, but also because Wu Ming ignored Maeve's charm. Maeve's beautiful body made her every move full of charm, and Wu Ming resisted Maeve's charm because of his powerful mental strength as the root dragon. Because of these two things, Maeve became interested in Wu Ming. At first, her love was indeed to play Wu Ming in the palm of her hand, but the real love was to accompany Wu Ming in the future. Wu Ming stayed by my Fu's side and learned about my Fu's past. Even if her body was full of charm, which girl was not innocent after birth? Maeve also had an unforgettable past to become like this. Whether it was pity for Maeve or indignation for Maeve's experience, Wu Ming stayed by Maeve's side and treated her as a younger sister who lacked love. Yes, Wu Ming only treated Maeve as a younger sister who needed to be doted on. The world always thought that Maeve played men in the palm of her hand, but Maeve had never received true love. Whether it was the love between family members, friends, or romantic love, Maeve had never had any of them. It had to be said that Maeve's true love for Wu Ming could be felt by Wu Ming. He was not a straight man, so why didn't Wu Ming accept it? The name of the root dragon was not an ordinary name. Ever since Wu Ming accepted his fate and left his original world to come to this moon, he knew that he would definitely not be ordinary in the future. And Square was often accompanied by danger. Before he obtained enough power to protect the people he wanted to protect, Wu Ming did not consider himself to be a burden. That's right, in the beginning, because Wu Ming did not activate the power of his bloodline, it was a little difficult for him to protect himself. Therefore, a lover was indeed a burden to Wu Ming. Wu Ming was able to leave the square world that he had lived in for more than 10 years without hesitation because he considered his own extraordinariness, because extraordinariness would also bring trouble. And now, facing such a Maeve, Wu Ming felt that he could already consider these things. Hey, Maeve, after I'm done with my business, I'll take your original body to my house. How about that? Wu Ming said in a flat tone. While speaking, Wu Ming put down the information in his hand and leaned back, closer to Maeve. It's time to make some promises. After hearing Wu Ming's words, Maeve's body suddenly trembled. Although Wu Ming was wearing armor, Wu Ming could still feel the change in Maeve. Well, I'll wait for that day. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait for you on the seat of heroes, waiting for you to pick me up. Maeve hugged Wu Ming's arm tightly and said with a happy face. The sun shone in from the window, shining on the pure white couple and blessing them. Chapter 477. Although it was heartwarming, Wu Ming did not want to reveal his innocence here. Then, the two of them began to discuss Rama, who hated the Celts, and Fergus, who was injured. So, you think Cedo is useful? So you asked Fergus to go to Alcatraz Island to transport Cedo, who has been captured a long time ago. In the end, Rama and the Argo who were following Rama were attracted? Wu Ming said calmly. As everyone knew, the American continent was huge, so was the United States. Therefore, the territories were not as strictly divided as Wu Ming had seen from the map. For example, The mountainous plains between the Rocky Mountains and the Great Lakes were unoccupied. The Celts were in the easternmost area, while the Greeks and Romans were in the western plains not far from the Appalachian Mountains. The Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not make any moves at all. As for the Lionhead forces, they were temporarily resting in the westernmost area as they could not defeat the other forces. The Missouri River flowed through that area, and the terrain was not too high. The Green Holy Grail forces were mainly in the southern part of the Rocky Mountains. Therefore, that area was the largest unoccupied land. Many of the native residents had formed a rebel army. It was said that they were led by a single follower. That was why they could be active in this continent. If the territories were as strictly divided as Wooming had seen on the map, how could there be a rebel army? They would have been suppressed by these forces long ago. All in all, the westernmost Alcatraz Island belonged to the easternmost Celts. There was nothing wrong with that. Ahem, let's not talk about that for now. According to Maeve, she was preparing to withdraw Beowulf, who was stationed in Alcatraz Island. Therefore, she sent Fergus to meet him. In the end, because Rama had a special skill that allowed him to sense Cedo, Rama intercepted Beowulf and Fergus halfway. For the sake of his beloved woman, the hero Rama sneaked up on Beowulf and threw out a noble relic. He almost killed Beowulf and severely injured him. Fortunately, Cedo was escorted by Wooming soldiers at the back. Otherwise, Rama's noble relic could have killed Cedo. However, if Cedo was beside Beowulf and Fergus, Rama would not be able to throw out his noble artifact. Afterward, when Fergus and Roma were fighting, Cedo was taken away by the crew of the Argo led by Aeson. They also killed Beowulf while they were at it. Atlanta was more than enough to deal with a heavily injured Beowulf, not to mention that there was also the god-magician Demetrius. Then, Rama, who was enraged once again, used his spiritual base and used another relic to injure Fergus. He then began to chase after Argo. Although it was called an injury, Fergus was almost done for. Rama had overdrawn his spiritual base to release the relic. Perhaps when Rama was fighting Wooming, he had also overdrawn his spiritual base to use the relic. As a lone servant, although Rama was summoned by the Holy Grail could only maintain Rama's current realm. It was impossible for it to provide unlimited mana. Almost all the other servants were the same. It seemed that only Wooming had a master, and that was Maeve. He couldn't see the command seal, because Maeve was wearing a white silk glove that blocked the command seal. After that, Fergus needed to return to Washington, so he followed Rama on the way. When they passed through Rome's sphere of influence, Caesar and Cleopatra, who attracted attention, appeared. The two of them watched Rama chase after the Argo, and Fergus chased Rama. With the mentality of watching a good show and supporting Caligula, the two of them followed. As a result, the scene when Wooming saw the four servants gathered in the big pit appeared. However, unfortunately, Caligula had already been killed by Wooming, and the good show that they wanted to watch had turned into a bad one. If that's the case, Rama should be dying now. At present, they only knew that Rama had overdrawn his mana and spiritual base to release his noble artifact twice. Before that, they couldn't deny whether Rama had overdrawn his mana or not. Coupled with the constant running in this huge American continent, he had consumed a lot of mana. Not to mention, my noble artifact and Rama's noble artifact exploded. The explosion wasn't far from Rama, so he must have been affected. Wooming was only affected by the explosion, but the armor on his body was dimmed, and he still needed Maeve to use a command seal to restore it. Rama, who had no armor, overdrawn his mana, an unstable spiritual base, was even worse. Maybe he has already left. If that's the case, my plan to unify the continent will be one step closer. After all, if Wooming wanted to unify the American continent, Wooming, who had become enemies with Rama, would definitely be troubled by Rama, the great hero of India. Wooming's people had kidnapped Rama's wife. Now that Wooming had accepted the identity of the Celtic king, he had to shoulder this responsibility. Yeah, the hatred of stealing my wife is irreconcilable. I have to unify the continent as soon as possible, Wooming said in a serious tone. Wuming and Maeve had already planned it out. Wuming's goal was to restore the singularity, so he had to collect the Holy Grail of the singularity. There were a total of 4 Holy Grails: the Celtic king, the Greek king, the Roman king, and the Holy Grail king who was still unknown. Wuming, who was the Celtic king, could be said to have one less enemy. After all, Maeve, who had the Holy Grail, was one of his people. Therefore, he had to deal with the other forces. Of course, Lionhead's native force in the United States did not have the Holy Grail, so he did not have to categorize it as an enemy for the time being. Therefore, Wuming set a small goal for himself, which was to unify the United States, collect the Holy Grail, and complete the restoration of humanity. However, Lionhead can also work with him. After all, both of them have the same goal, Wuming analyzed. Lionhead's goal must be to restore the United States, and Wuming's goal was to collect the Holy Grail, so he needed to unify the country. In that case, the two sides could work together. But before the other 3 forces came to this singularity, we and Lionhead were mortal enemies. I'm afraid it's not that easy to bury the hatchet. Maeve said, "That's right, mortal enemies would not easily unite just because of an additional enemy. It was not that easy." "That's true," Wuming said in a deep voice. Then, Wuming thought of Gadotsi. "I don't know if Tachika and the others came to this singularity. If they had the help of Chaldea's master, it would be a great help to collect the Holy Grail. After all, the reason why those followers were alone was because they were summoned by the Holy Grail. They helped Chaldea's master to take back the source of the singularity. After all, the singularity was caused by the followers with their own private wishes, so it was impossible to talk about it. By the way, in Celtic, besides you, me, Fergus, and Beowulf, are there any other followers?" Wuming suddenly said to Maeve. Chapter 478. The reason why Wuming asked this question was because Wuming had never seen other Celtic servants. If he didn't meet Fergus, he wouldn't know that Fergus was on his side. There are 3 more, but one of them is not from Celtic, but from India, and he has a little relationship with Romo. Maeve pretended to be mysterious and said to Wuming with a playful smile, "If there is a chance, introduce them to me." Wuming chuckled and said lightly. Wuming's meaning was obvious. He was going out again. "Are you going out again? Really? Can't you spend more time with me?" Maeve said coquettishly. Her body began to produce charm again. Maeve naturally knew that charm was ineffective on Wuming, but it was her body's natural ability, and it was released involuntarily. Then, Wuming touched Maeve's head with his hand that was wearing white protective gear. "Although I have become a king, after all, I have no interest in it, so I will leave it to you, my queen." After touching Maeve's head, Wuming asked some information about his servants and Lionhead's information and left the room. "My king, I will help you take care of our country." Maeve, who had once again turned into an infatuated woman, was left alone in the room. Wuming was ready to go to the United States, which was the westernmost part of the American continent. Now that he couldn't find Gadotsi for the time being, Wuming was ready to go to the countries that could be united. He just wanted to meet the old friend that he heard from Maeve. "I just don't know if he remembers me," Wuming said casually. When he walked to the corner, Wuming met 2 people. Well, the person in front of Wuming was obviously a master and servant, and the 2 showed a very obvious superior and subordinate relationship. The former was a handsome man with long blonde hair, and the latter was a young man with short black hair and a mole. What a coincidence to meet the Holy King. The blonde man's tone was not too respectful, but also not arrogant, as if he was in front of a person who deserved a little respect. "I am Finn McCool. This is my subordinate," the blonde man introduced to Wuming. "Nice to meet you, Your Highness Holy King. I am Dilmond O'Dina," the black-haired man behind Finn said respectfully to Wuming. It seemed that Finn and Dilmond were 2 of the 3 remaining servants of the Celtic side. After all, Maeve had said that one of them was from India, but the 2 in front of Wuming were from Ireland. "You don't have to be so courteous to me. If I remember correctly, you guys are from the Fjodna Knights. Speaking of which, you guys have some history with Fergus." Wuming nodded knowingly. Finn smiled calmly when he heard that. The necessary etiquette is still necessary. You are the Connaught Silver Dragon Cylinder who defeated Fergus. Even Cuculin didn't beat you. Naturally, you need to be respectful to a hero." Dillman shook his head with a smile. Wooming had some recollection of what Dillman said. When Connaught and Ulster went to war, Fergus ran over to serve Maeve. Because he couldn't stand Fergus's lecherous eyes, Wooming chased him away. At that time, Maeve even laughed at Wooming, saying something like, "Since you were jealous, then just accept me." Ahem, Wooming was just a siscon. How could he let his cabbage stay with a wild boar? Now that he thought about it, it seemed that Wooming was quite a siscon. He watched Artoria grow up, and Joan of Arc was younger than him in his memory. There were also Illyria, Mayu, and Shobi. They all seemed to be siscons or siscons. How could it be? It was just a coincidence. Wooming shook his head subconsciously, but this scene was humble in the eyes of Finn and Dillman. You don't have to be humble. Your achievements on the battlefield between Greece and Rome are still vivid in our minds. At that time, Finn and Dillman were not in Washington. The two of them were outside roping in stragglers. Of course, they basically did not gain anything. They only met a few low-level servants, and because they did not obey, they were all killed. Again, the American continent was very big. At that time, the two of them did not meet Fergus or Wooming. Then, near the battlefield, they saw the nuclear explosion caused by Wooming's noble phantasm. Wooming did not say anything more, and then asked the two of them, "You two, are you going to ask May for instructions now? You don't have to do anything. Just defend our camp steadily." Immediately, Wooming gave instructions. The situation was not completely clear, and the third party of the Holy Grail force was not clear either. Doing nothing was the best way at the moment. Although Wooming said so, Finn was still a little hesitant. Maeve did give orders after Wooming arrived, and Wooming's words were the final word. However, no matter what, Wooming had only been here for less than 2 days. It was the same principle as the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. Just listen to Xiao Sai. At that moment, Maeve's voice came from behind Wooming. After all, Maeve was also a very active person, and it was unlikely that she would sit in the office for a long time. In addition, Wooming, Finn, and Dillman had been arguing for a long time, so it was normal for Maeve to catch up. Didn't I say that Xiao Sai's words are the highest order? "You may leave," Maeve said casually to Finn and Dillman. "Understood. Let's go, Dillman." Finn nodded and waved at Dillman. "Yes." Dillman responded and followed Finn out of the place. At that moment, Wooming's heart was in turmoil. Sure enough, the servants are not obedient. Whether it was from Finn's attitude or the conversation with Wooming, it could be seen that he did not put himself in the position of a subject. He was just obeying Maeve's orders. Wooming believed that if it were not for the Holy Grail, Finn and Dillman would probably have left here and set up their own house. After all, they were summoned by Maeve with the Holy Grail, and Maeve also had a slight suppressive power over them. "Is it okay?" Wooming asked Maeve with concern. Maeve naturally knew what Wooming was talking about. At least they are very obedient. After all, heroes are always eccentric guys. However, if Xiao Sai hates them, just get rid of them. Holding Wooming's hand, Maeve said charmingly, "That's not necessary. It's better than nothing." Wooming shook his head. Then Wooming felt that something was wrong. "Why do I feel like I become a big boss?" "Sai, listen to Xiao Sai." Chapter 479. Night, Missouri River Basin. A person wearing a black robe and a black hood, whose face couldn't be seen clearly, was quietly running along the Missouri River. The figure sometimes changed his route, sometimes he hid, and sometimes he came to the Black Mountain in the western part of the Missouri River Basin. This silhouette arrived in a dense forest near Black Mountain and stopped. The figure took off his hood, revealing a black-haired, golden-eyed face. The person who came was naturally Wooming, who was preparing to go to the western part of the Rocky Mountains to investigate and cooperate with Lionhead. It had to be said that there were many plains in the United States, but there weren't many forests, but they weren't few either. Wooming sometimes changed his route, sometimes he hid, and sometimes he didn't want to be discovered by the servants and humans in this area. At night, the people in the American continent were active, whether they were servants or humans. And this Missouri River Basin was a place that was not occupied by the Holy Grail forces. In this way, whether it was the followers, the native residents, or the rebels, they were like fish in water in this place. The unknown Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not move, and Greece and Rome were fighting fiercely. Lionhead and Maeve were in the westernmost and easternmost part of the continent. In this way, no one had time to care about this place. Naturally, it became a place where many followers and a large number of human residents resisted. And this place, in Wuming's view, could be said to be the safest passage from the east to the west. Like a lone assassin, Wuming quietly came here. By the way, the meaning of being alone was not only superficial, but it also had another meaning. A lone follower actually referred to a follower that was not a force. After all, not all non-force followers were really alone like Wuming. On this continent, it was originally the native forces of the United States that fought against the United Kingdom and succeeded in independence, but now it was divided into 5 parts. In addition to the followers who held the Holy Grail and the forces summoned by the native forces of the United States, the Holy Grail also summoned extra followers. Due to the large number of Holy Grails with this singularity, there were many followers who were left behind. Apart from Finn and Dilmod killing a few unranked servants, Fergus also encountered many lone servants on his way to Alcatraz Island. Fergus, no, it should be the Celtic followers, were all warlike. Fergus had basically been fighting along the way. This was also one of the reasons why Fergus had been so easily beaten down by Rama. After all, Rama had also overdrawn his spirit base. With so many factors added together, Fergus had been unable to block him. On the other hand, Beowulf was completely unlucky. Not only did the despicable Rama launch a sneak attack on him, but he was also ambushed by the Greek team. Wuming did not even see him and left the stage immediately. Except for some servants with special abilities or noble phantoms, or a few servants that Fergus didn't kill, the rest of the servants were killed by Fergus. Even so, there were still a lot of lone followers who were active on this continent. At this moment, Wuming had become a lone assassin. It was reasonable to say that because of Maeve's wish and Wuming's cheating, the spirit base could not be changed. Moreover, because of the identity of the Holy Ruler, Wuming was like a big light bulb in the dark night, unable to hide the arrival of the Holy Ruler. But this can't stop Wuming from being a cheater. Although the authority and the blade of salvation were not brought into this body because of the Serland spirit base, Wuming had brought his own dimensional noble phantasm, Dragonus Dragon's Nest. In the beginning, Wuming only wanted to use the dimensional Loon Rune to store things in a small space. Now, the Dragon's Nest could be said to have been reborn. Not only was it nourished by Wuming's magic every day, but it was also soaked in the origin of the moon for a long time. Then, it was soaked in Wuming's home, the origin of the moon, for a long time. One had to know that this dimensional Loon Rune was engraved on Wuming's body. In other words, in the origin, Wuming's dimensional noble phantasm was equivalent to being strengthened all the time. Moreover, it was a qualitative strengthening. Now, the space inside the dragon's nest had become almost infinite. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small world. Although it was still used by Wuming to store things, however, it was just as well. Wuming was a collecting maniac. Everything that caught his eye was kept in the dragon's nest. Putting aside the things that he collected in Kanzaki, Wuming had also been through several worlds and secretly stored a lot of things. If one had to say, Wuming's dragon's nest could be regarded as a different kind of gate of Babylon. For example, there were many items that could shield one's magic and aura. Since he was going to be an assassin, the first thing he needed to do was hide. Wuming took out a dim gem from his bosom. It was a tool used for assassination. It could shield one's aura, but it was no longer effective. This thing seems to be from the Yggdrasil world tree. It's surprisingly useful. Forget it. Who cares? Wuming casually crushed the dim gem. With a thought, the space fluctuated and golden ripples appeared. Then, Wuming took out a metal ball from the golden ripples. It was the metal ball that Shiobi had fused with half of her core. I kind of missed that little girl. Wuming was naturally referring to his younger sister, Shiobi. In Wuming's opinion, Shiobi, who had just obtained human emotions, was like a child. Although her brain was more genius than a genius, Shiobi was a parsing machine after all. Then, Wuming pressed the metal ball against his body without hesitation. In an instant, the metal ball seemed to have turned into liquid and integrated into Wuming's clothes. At that moment, Wuming had already taken off his armor and put on the clothes from the other world with the Divine Soul Seed. This was the first time Wuming had taken off his armor in this singularity. He was inexplicably excited. Cough, cough? Is this the formation of an inner armor? Wuming could clearly feel that there was a layer of metal armor covering his assassin-style clothes. However, it was not completely covered. Wuming could feel it. Now that I think about it, the Kekai race is really a cheating race. In various senses, as he said that, a metal mask appeared on Wuming's face. Only the area where the eyes were was left with a rectangular gap with a rectangular black lens. Then, several particularly strange, small magic circles unfolded around Wuming, setting off a small gust of wind. In an instant, the wind stopped and the magic circles disappeared. That's it. Chapter 480. After all, the forest elves. No, it should be said that in their world, everyone's magic looked gaudy. Why did it not work in Wuming's hands? Forget it, as long as it works. Through the data on the black lens, Wuming could check his own status. Although the lens looked black from the outside, Wuming saw it as transparent. Not only that, the night was now like day in Wuming's eyes. At that moment, the lens display showed a map of Wuming's surroundings. On the map, places with energy were blue, and places without energy were white. After all, the Kekai elves did not use magic, so no matter what kind of unknown energy it was, as long as it was energy, it would be marked. Magic was blue. Looking at his white body, Wuming was a little confused. Others in this world shouldn't be able to see the forest elves' magic, right? That's right. Wuming used the Kekai elves' characteristics to cast the forest elves' magic that was copied into the metal ball. Giliel had gotten Wuming many books about forest elves' magic. Wuming did not ask where they came from and stored those magic in the core in the root, because there was no need to learn it anymore, just like Wuming's nameless spellbook. Although Wuming used to flip through it often, he realized that it was faster to use the spellbook automatically than to cast it himself, so Wuming gave up. Ahem. Back to the main topic. Although it was reasonable to say that the Kekai elves could only copy an attack that had been seen or damaged once, when he was in the root, Wuming had slightly modified the core, making the core sublimate from its original foundation. In short, it would not have any bad effects on Shiobi. So, am I back to my old profession? Although Wuming was not strong when he was an assassin, Wuming quite liked it. After moving his body, Wuming felt incomparably comfortable. After all, it was still comfortable in the state where his aura was blocked. No matter how sneaky he was, it was as if he was in the open. At this moment, Wuming discovered that there were energy bodies approaching from the surroundings. Servant? He doesn't look like a passerby. With that thought in mind, Wuming activated the camouflage function and disappeared. Just as Wuming hid himself, a man with dark brown skin, half-naked upper body, and a small knife in his hand arrived. After vigilantly observing the surrounding situation and inspecting the place, the man quickly left. Servants that were attracted by the whirlwind just now. Wuming revealed himself and muttered to himself. Wuming could tell that the other party was a servant by the speed of a Class B when he left. What's more, the other party's body was also filled with a lot of magical power. Wuming could see clearly through the lens that the magic power in the other party's body was slightly dark blue. At the very least, the other party's magic attribute should be a Class B. It's rare that he is a caster. Wuming thought. It seems that I have to be careful. When he activated the core, Wuming caused a small whirlwind. A whirlwind appeared in the woods at night, which naturally attracted the other party's attention. As a caster, Wuming's assassin at the moment was not a good match. Assassins in the dark were most afraid of those fancy magicians. The other party should not have found me. After all, who knows what magic caster will use? If the other party's magic is quite powerful, then Wu Ming will be exposed. Later, Wu Ming looked at the place where the other party checked. Sure enough, there were some mysterious inscriptions that Wu Ming did not know. Is it a curse on this continent? Wu Ming pondered and activated the scanning device in the core of Ji-Kai seed. Immediately, the result appeared on the lens in front of Wu Ming's eyes. Sure enough, the guy turned out to be a caster magician. Looking at him, sneakily holding a knife, anyone who saw him would think that he was an assassin. If it weren't for the scanning information provided by the lens, Wu Ming wouldn't have seen that there was a lot of magical power in the other party's body. If the servants were close to each other, they could perceive each other, but they couldn't perceive how much magical power the other party had unless the other party continued to release magical power. Just like Wu Ming's skill, Holy King's Glory, Wu Ming used magical power to release magical power. In the eyes of others, it was an incomparably huge source of magical power. Often, the existence of powerful magical power was not something to be trifled with. To put it simply, it was like tigers and lions roaring in nature to tell others that they were not to be trifled with. According to the scanning results, these inscriptions played a role in detection. As long as someone passed by this place, it would be triggered. Fortunately, although Wu Ming was present, the shielding magic of the forest elves had been working. I don't care. Destroying these inscriptions will arouse the other party's suspicion. After that, Wu Ming continued to move toward the west. On the way, Wu Ming also saved the map of the American continent in the core, and a virtual live map appeared in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming looked at the map. There's a town called Riverton at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. After Riverton, we will reach the Rocky Mountains. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming put away the virtual map, pulled his collar, and continued to move forward. Almost a few minutes later, Wu Ming came to a place some distance away from Riverton. Looking at the sparsely lit small town in front of him, Wu Ming paused. He felt the presence of servants in the town in front of him, but the specific number was unknown. Immediately afterward, he activated the scanning function of the armor again. Sure enough, Wu Ming found a clue: anti-detection and defense magic. Chapter 481. Wu Ming heard the sound of air friction and leaned back, dodging the arrow that was shot at him. To be honest, if it wasn't for the warrior's insight, Wu Ming wouldn't have noticed the arrow. Looking at the ancient wooden arrow that was deeply embedded in the ground, Wu Ming found that it was entangled with magic such as silence, acceleration, and stealth, although these magic had been ineffective. No wonder he couldn't hear anything and couldn't see anything. It seemed that the opponent's magic was not low. At this moment, the lens in front of Wu Ming's eyes also showed the arrow attack. There was no doubt that the arrow that was just enchanted with many magic had escaped the scanning of the Kikai core. It seemed that he couldn't rely too much on things from another world. In any case, it was really inconvenient to use things that were not from his world. I've been discovered. By now, if Wu Ming still didn't know that he had been discovered, then he really lived in vain. Since he was discovered, Wu Ming simply didn't hide. Feeling that there was a servant running toward him, Wu Ming didn't escape, but stood up. The inner armor that was transformed by the Kikai core was still worn by Wu Ming. Then, magic emerged from Wu Ming's body, and the magic began to burn. The white flame covered Wu Ming's whole body. Then, Wu Ming raised one of his hands and waved. The white flame disappeared with the wave of his hand, and Wu Ming appeared in the air. He had already put on the white full-body armor. Arthur's gift armor. He muttered the name of the relic softly. The holy armor seemed to be responding to him as it flashed with white light. At that time, the attacking servant also arrived. It looked like, no, he was a berserker. Ah ha ha. Oppressor. You are the oppressor. Ah ha ha. The person who came was Spartacus, the red team berserker in the 14 Horsemen War. Because Wu Ming was in the red team at that time, so the two were regarded as allies. But Spartacus probably couldn't remember it. And the oppressor that Spartacus was talking about was probably Wu Ming's current identity as the king. This guy was quite obsessed with leaders, and he was even more obsessed with tyrants. But in general, he was still a berserker that could be communicated with. Of course, this was for the master. In this way, Spartacus, who had met Wu Ming once, jumped up, raised his ordinary iron sword, and slashed at Wu Ming. Clank! Wu Ming raised his arm and blocked Spartacus' iron sword. Arthur's armor of gift, which had a grade A defense against physical damage, was more than enough to block Spartacus's iron sword. Bang! Immediately after, with the sound of steel colliding, Wu Ming used his hand to block Spartacus's iron sword and pushed him away. Spartacus took a few steps back, stopped, and laughed excitedly. "Ah ha ha! Ah ha ha ha! Oppressor! Give me even more pressure!" Like a fanatic, Spartacus once again rushed to Wu Ming with his sword. To be honest, Wu Ming didn't want to fight with this guy. Spartacus's strength was grade A, and his durability was the highest grade, EX. In short, this guy couldn't be killed. However, in addition to that, Spartacus could also convert the damage he received into mana and store it in his own body to activate his healing beast roar. In the Battle of 14 Nights, although Wu Ming was not present, through chatting with Joan of Arc, Wu Ming learned that she used her noble phantasm to resist Spartacus' noble phantasm. After all, it was a grade A noble phantasm, and it was supplemented by a large amount of magic. Although Wu Ming's armor could block a grade of physical attack, in the face of a grade A super explosion, he would be defeated if he was not careful. Because of this, Wu Ming didn't want to be entangled with Spartacus. It just so happened that Spartacus' ability, except for strength and durability, did not exceed grade C, and his agility was only grade D. In other words, there was no need for Wu Ming to clash head-on with his opponent. Of course, Wu Ming's strength had reached grade A, and he had the support of Lun's magic and mecha armor. He was not afraid of a head-on clash. Sure enough, it's better to fight quickly. After all, since Spartacus was here, it meant that the other 10 servants Wu Ming observed were also here. Although Wu Ming was not weak, after all, it was unlikely that more than 10 servants were first-class or even top-level servants. If that was the case, Wu Ming had to consider running away. Oppressor? Looking at Spartacus, who rushed in front of him again, Wu Ming decided to end the battle immediately. Clank! The sound of steel colliding was heard again, but this time, Wu Ming did not block Spartacus' iron sword with his arm, but he firmly grasped Spartacus' iron sword with his palm. Ahaha! Oppressor! Spartacus struggled to pull back his weapon, but it did not move. At this moment, Wu Ming's hand that was holding Spartacus' iron sword was full of Lun's runes and electrical wiring. That was the Lun's magic that strengthened his strength and the mechanical armor's enhancement. The double enhancement allowed Silent Wonder's strength to temporarily surpass a rank. It was not correct to say that he was EX rank, but rather his strength had become A++. After all, it was temporary. However, the data was nothing to worry about. Wu Ming's purpose was only to control Spartacus for a few seconds. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming's free hand was inserted straight into the space, and a golden ripple wrapped around Wu Ming's hand. Then, Wu Ming's hand was pulled out of the golden ripple, and a silver-white chain was pulled out by Wu Ming from the golden ripple. That's right, that was the pseudo-heaven lock that Wu Ming once created with Create Green item. Clatter! With the sound of the chain, Wu Ming threw the silver chain on Spartacus' body. Like a silver python, the silver chain tightly wrapped around Spartacus' limbs and body after coming into contact with him. Then, Wu Ming let go of Spartacus' iron sword. Clang! The iron sword fell to the ground. Although the pseudo-heaven lock also had a special attack on divinity, Spartacus did not have divinity, so the chain was just a solid chain that was difficult for Spartacus to break free. However, if one looked carefully, they would find that there were Lune runes on the silver chain. Fearing that Spartacus would break free from the chain, Wu Ming instantly added Lune runes to the pseudo-heaven lock after taking out the pseudo-heaven lock. As a result, Spartacus, who was bound by the strengthened pseudo-heaven lock, was strangled to death. Of course, Spartacus, who could not use his strength, naturally let go of the iron sword and let it fall to the ground. Immediately afterward, Wuming reached into the golden ripple and took out 2 chains. Of course, this time, it was not to deal with Spartacus, but to deal with the new servant. Create green item, advanced item creation. As Wuming's words fell, 2 holy swords were inserted into the ground. Chapter 482. Immediately afterward, Wuming wrapped the 2 pseudo-heavenly chains around his hands. After that, Wuming grabbed the 2 long swords on the ground. These 2 swords were almost exactly the same as Wuming's blade of salvation. To be precise, they were exactly the same as Artoria's Excalibur. These 2 swords were imitations created by Wuming using Create Green item. For the pseudo-Excalibur, although it could still release light cannons, its power and range were not only 1 level lower, but several levels lower. Of course, the sharpness of these 2 pseudo-holy swords was also greatly reduced. The reason why Wuming used Create Green item to create these 2 pseudo-holy swords was to use them as consumables. Through the scanning device on the mecha armor, coupled with the fact that the other party did not cover up, Wuming easily saw the servant coming from behind him. It's them. Wuming sighed. What an ill-fated relationship. He shook his head. With their speed, they could indeed get behind him, and by doing this, they must not let him escape. Wuming smiled helplessly. I didn't expect them to be summoned as well. They can be considered old rivals. The one who strikes first gains the advantage. I won't hold back then. Wuming smiled. With that said, Wuming wrapped the chains on his arms around the hilts of the 2 holy swords. Immediately, he threw the pseudo-holy swords. Excalibur! On the opposite side, the green-haired young man held a long spear and ran toward Wuming at a very fast speed. Although he was a rider, he had a permanent noble phantasm, so he did not need his own ride. Although this would expose his weakness, there were not many people who could catch up with his speed. You little thief who dares to spy on me, obediently accept your death. Then, listening to his disciples' bold words, his teacher, who had transformed into a centaur, chased after him. Don't underestimate the enemy, Achilles. The enemy is still in the same place. Achilles seemed a little impatient as he listened to teacher Ma's earnest teachings and diligent exhortations. However, he still nodded to show that he understood. Yes, I know, Master Sharon. Although this disciple of his looked arrogant and unruly, he still gave him face as his teacher. Just as Achilles thought, there were almost no servants who could catch up with him. Even his teacher, Sharon, could not. Even if his teacher hadn't told him not to underestimate the enemy, Achilles would have slowed down. Otherwise, if Achilles were to run at full speed, even if he was in his centaur form and running on 4 legs, he would not be able to catch up with Achilles, let alone talk to him. At that moment, a voice came into their ears. Excalibur! What? Sharon secretly frowned. Thought in his heart, this was a little troublesome. Hearing this sentence, Sharon was shocked. Not to mention that it was a liberation noble phantasm. The holy sword Excalibur was quite famous. He tried to see the enemy's figure to determine whether the enemy was King Arthur or not. But even with his clairvoyance, the enemy was deep in the forest, so Sharon could not see the enemy's appearance. In addition, not only Sharon, but Achilles also knew about the legend of King Arthur and the holy sword. After all, King Arthur was too famous, especially in Europe. Although Sharon and Achilles both knew about the holy sword, the 2 of them had different reactions. Is the enemy King Arthur? Unlike Charon's frown, Achilles' first reaction after hearing the word liberation was excitement. For Achilles, who was asked to choose to die as an ordinary person or die on the battlefield, chose the latter. A powerful enemy was his motivation. However, even so, Achilles wasn't a hothead. Although he did not know why King Arthur would release his noble phantasm, he had seen the power of the holy sword before, from the Battle of the 14 Knights that he retained his memory of. Although he was also very puzzled as to why he retained his memory of that battle, since Sharon also retained it, he would leave the brainstorming to his teacher. Just as Achilles was about to take out his noble phantasm to surround the small world of the heavens, Achilles' cosmos. For defense, Achilles was stunned on the spot. It wasn't just Achilles. Even Sharon was stunned. This was because they saw two small light pillars, less than 5 meters in diameter, shooting towards them at a speed that was not considered fast. Of course, this was for the two of them who had grade A+ agility. If it were Spartacus, he would definitely be hit. Moreover, why were there two light pillars? Wasn't there only one holy sword, Excalibur? What really confused Sharon and Achilles was not this, but the scale of the noble phantasm. Although they had never seen the holy sword Excalibur's noble phantasm, they had seen another holy sword's noble phantasm before. How could the scale be so different? In any case, Achilles and Sharon were completely confused right now. With such a scale, they did not even need to defend, they only needed to dodge. By the way, the two of them would not directly charge towards Wooming, but chose to attack from the side. Although the light pillars were less than 5 meters in diameter, if it affected Riverton, who had a master, it would be quite troublesome. That was why the two of them went to the back. Of course, not letting this strange King Arthur escape was also one of the reasons. In just a flash, Achilles dodged the attack range of the two light pillars that were less than 10 meters in diameter side by side. For servants, especially those who had grade A+ agility, a distance of 100 meters only needed a breath of time, and a fierce jump was enough. Then, the two of them witnessed the small light pillars explode from their sides. Feeling the scorching heat, the two of them had no choice but to be serious. Even if it was a fake Excalibur, it was still a holy sword, and it was also a trump card noble phantasm. Of course, it was hard to say if it hit Sharon, but even if it hit Achilles, it would not take his life. At most, it would only injure him. At this moment, Charon's eyes flickered, and he hurriedly called out to Achilles. Achilles, quickly retreat. Charon's clairvoyant skill combined with mind's eye, true, to achieve a short period of future vision. Through this, he saw chains appear in the light pillars that were less than 5 meters long. Although he relied on future vision and mind's eye to avoid being tied up by the chains, Sharon saw Achilles being tied up by the chains. Hearing his teacher's words, Achilles naturally prepared to retreat. But Wooming seemed to have heard Charon's words, and the chains instantly appeared from the light pillars and shot towards Sharon and Achilles. Walala. Chapter 483. Whoosh. Using his wooden bow to shoot an arrow, Sharon broke the chain that was heading straight for him and quickly retreated on all fours. Then, Sharon looked in Achilles' direction. Without a doubt, Achilles was tied up. His spear fell to the ground, and his arms and body were tied up by the silver chain like firewood. In the end, Achilles had underestimated his opponent. However, this was also due to his competitive nature. Unlike Sharon, who had moved more than 10 meters, Achilles had only dodged to the side of the light pillar. It could be said that he had almost brushed against it to show off his ability. In the end, the chain covered by the light pillar had tied him up in an instant. This really was a case of if you don't do it, you won't die. I see. The target wasn't me from the beginning. Sharon saw the light pillar disappear, and the chain slowly retracted. Perhaps it was not meant to tie him up in the first place. Realization dawned on him. Ugh, damn it. Why can't I break free from a chain? Achilles said angrily. At this moment, Achilles was already using all his strength. He grimaced, but he could not break free from the silver chain. Instead, the chain was getting tighter and tighter. Sharon, on the other hand, did not care about his disciple. Instead, he raised his wooden bow and pointed in the direction of the forest. It wasn't just him. Even Achilles could feel that the owner of the chain was getting closer. So it seems that Spartacus has failed? Sharon said calmly. Of course, it was not Sharon who had asked Wooming to scout. Spartacus happened to be the closest to Wooming, so when he heard that there was an enemy, he ran over excitedly. Stop, Achilles. The chain is getting tighter the more you struggle, Sharon said to Achilles without turning his head. Achilles also realized that he could not break free no matter how hard he tried. He simply listened to Sharon and stopped struggling, and looked at the fours together. Seeing that the chain that did not bind Sharon was slowly being dragged into the forest, they guessed that the enemy was about to reach the edge of the forest. That's a chain that targets divinity. After all, an immortal demigod hero isn't easy to deal with. Wuming's voice came from the forest. This voice is... Karen frowned again. He had sensed something when he heard the word Excalibur. Furthermore, it was rumored that Sodric had obtained the inheritance of the Knight of the Round Table, Villotharanst. It was not impossible for him to have a weakened version of the Holy Sword. Therefore, Ka Rong estimated that he was close to the mark. Of course, Achilles, who was in a state of rage, did not pay much attention to Wuming's words. His face was full of resentment. "You despicable person, if you have the ability, let go of me and fight me head on. What kind of hero are you if you play tricks?" Then, wearing a holy white armor, a silver white chain wrapped around his right hand, and a silver white chain still wrapped around his left hand. However, this chain was connected to Achilles' body. As for the two holy swords, their durability had long since reached its limit. They turned into magic power and disappeared within the pillar of light. "What? It's actually this guy. Sodric, if you have the ability, let go of me." Achilles became even more agitated, as if he had seen an old enemy. "I didn't expect you to be summoned here." Karen also had a face full of emotion. However, he still did not lower his bow, an arrow aimed at Wuming. After all, this continent was too chaotic. Including them, there were a total of 6 forces. Who knew which side this old friend in front of him was on? In the face of their words, it was Wu Ming who was dumbfounded. What's going on? It was rare for them to have memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, or were they the servants of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen? After all, Sodric had only appeared during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. Wu Ming, who had a deal with the 2 great restraining forces, had already set a rule that his servant image could not be sent out without his permission. Since Karen and Achilles recognized him, then they either had memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen or were the servants of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. But how did they recognize me when they didn't see my face? Could it be through my voice? Wuming began to think again. Karen had indeed recognized Wuming's voice, but Achilles had only reacted after seeing Wuming's armor. As if thinking of this, Wuming looked at his armor in relief and understood. This armor was basically the same as the armor Wuming wore during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, but the armor worn by Wuming during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen was not as bright as this armor. There was also the addition of a helmet. However, with Wuming's voice, it wasn't impossible for Achilles and Sharon to recognize him. But since Karen and Achilles both had memories, why didn't Atlanta recognize him? Or did she recognize him but didn't want to say it? As for Spartacus, that guy doesn't care who you are. As long as you are an oppressor, I will beat you, regardless of whether you are an enemy or not. And while Wuming was thinking, Achilles looked at the silent Wuming and was a little impatient. "Hey, say something." Karen was also thinking silently. Could it be that Sodric didn't have memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen like him and Achilles? Achilles' roar made Wuming come back to his senses. Sorry, I just didn't expect you to have memories of that time. So I fell in a deep thought for a moment. Wuming's voice came from under the helmet again. "Kaka!" Then, Wuming controlled the helmet to open. "It's good that you still remember. Was the spying just now you, or was it your partner?" Karen began to question Wuming. After all, if there was no hostility, spying secretly was not appropriate. However, even if they were enemies, Sodric's actions made Achilles, and even Karen, slightly disdainful. After all, in their eyes, Sodric was a person of importance. How could he be reduced to the point of peeping? But if you say you were peeping, then so be it. Your skills were so bad that you were discovered in an instant. Aren't you embarrassed? Wuming naturally didn't feel embarrassed, although what he did was a little shady. After all, passing by here had aroused Wuming's interest, so Wuming didn't know how to explain it. He couldn't say, "I was just looking around because I was interested," or something like that. "I passed by here and sensed the presence of many servants in this town, so I did a simple check. I didn't expect to be discovered by you." Wu Ming didn't even blush as he spoke about his peeping so openly. But he didn't expect that a simple scan of the mecha armor would be discovered by Karen. Just now, I sensed someone spying on us through the mind's eye, so I went ahead with Achilles and came out to take a look. Master will be here soon. If you want to run, do it now. Karen calmly said to Wu Ming. Hey, Sensei, how are you going to cover this guy? Achilles asked, puzzled. I'm not covering his escape. After all, even if Chaldea's master and other servants come, if Sadric wants to run, I don't think our chances of catching him are high. Karen didn't care about Wu Ming's presence and said directly to Achilles. And there was something else Karen didn't say. Especially since you, the strongest of us, are still bound by the celestial lock. Sharon, who was highly intelligent, had guessed what Wu Ming was talking about when he heard about the chains of divinity. After all, the only silver-white noble phantasm that was tighter and tighter to the divine chain was the celestial lock. Although Karen was also very curious about where Wu Ming got the celestial lock. As he raised his eyebrows, Sharon continued to stare at Wu Ming. Then he realized that Wu Ming was smiling. Hey, the master of Chaldea you mentioned, is it the orange-haired little girl called Fujimaru Tachika? Then, seeing Achilles' expression of, how did you know? Wu Ming got his answer. Looking at Gadatsi, who was escorted by a group of servants in the distance, Wu Ming loosened the chain that bound Achilles. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.